The axe fell against splintering oak with a crack that echoed across the empty Dakota plains. Hannah Cole's bleeding hands gripped the handle as winter's first snow began to fall, each flake a reminder that she was running out of time. Then she heard hoofbeats approaching her failing homestead. A massive figure dismounted his shadow, swallowing her whole, and his words froze her blood colder than any winter wind. By winter's end, you'll carry my child. Before you think you know where this story goes, let me tell you about the most unlikely love that ever bloomed on the frontier. Stick with me till the end and drop a comment about which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled. The morning Hannah Cole buried her husband, the earth fought her every inch of the way. October in Dakota Territory was unforgiving. The ground already half frozen, resisting the shovel like it wanted to deny Thomas Cole even this final rest. She dug alone through the night, her neighbors too far scattered across the plains to arrive in time, and by dawn her palms were raw meat wrapped around the wooden handle. "Till death do us part," she whispered to the mound of fresh earth, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The words tasted like lies. Death hadn't parted them at all. Thomas was still here in every corner of their homestead, in every unfinished project he'd started, in the rocking chair frame he'd never complete, in the debts he'd left behind. 6 weeks later, Hannah stood in what remained of their dream, swinging an axe at the stubborn oak she needed for firewood. The November wind cut through her worn coat, Thomas's coat really taken from his things because hers had worn through at the elbows. Each swing sent shockwaves of pain through her blistered hands, but stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant joining Thomas sooner than she intended. The homestead was collapsing around her literally and figuratively. The roof leaked in 3 places, patched with whatever she could find. Old flour sacks, pieces of tin, even some of Thomas's clothes. The chicken coop door hung at an angle after last week's windstorm, and she'd lost 2 hens to coyotes before she could fix it properly. The pantry that Thomas had always promised to stock next harvest held nothing but preserves from 2 summers ago, a bag of flour with more dust than substance, and the kind of stubborn pride that kept her from begging at her neighbors' doors. She'd sold the plow horse last month to buy supplies, sold Thomas's rifle the week after that. Now there was nothing left to sell except the land itself, and that would mean admitting defeat, proving everyone right who'd said a woman couldn't manage alone on the frontier. The axe stuck in the wood, and she yanked at it, cursing under her breath. That's when she heard them hoofbeats, steady and purposeful, coming up the trail that led to her property. Hannah's stomach clenched. Bill Garrett from the bank had already been by twice each visit, less polite than the last. She freed the axe and held it ready, not as a tool, but as a weapon. The rider who crested the hill wasn't Bill Garrett. Jonas Hale sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, which, according to frontier gossip, wasn't far from the truth. Even from a distance, Hannah could tell he was enormous, the kind of man who had to duck through doorways and whose handshake could crush fingers without trying. She'd seen him exactly 3 times in the 2 years since she and Thomas had claimed their homestead, once at the general store, once at the harvest dance she'd attended before Thomas got sick, and once at Thomas's funeral, standing in the back like a mountain paying its respects. He dismounted with surprising grace for such a large man, his boots hitting the ground with definitive thuds. Hannah noticed his horse, a massive black stallion that most men couldn't even mount, stood perfectly still without being trained to obedience by nothing more than Jonas's presence. "Mrs. Cole," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep as a well, the kind of voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Mr. Hale," she replied, not lowering the axe. "If Bill Garrett sent you." "Nobody sent me." He stood there, hat in hands that could span a dinner plate, and she noticed something she'd missed at the funeral. His eyes were gray as winter sky, but warm somehow, like smoke from a welcoming fire. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35 to her 30. Though the sun and wind had weathered him in that way, the frontier weathered everyone. "Then what brings you out here?" She kept her voice steady, though her arms were beginning to shake from holding the axe. Pride made her maintain the position. "I came to make you an offer. I'm not selling. I'm not buying." They stood there locked in a moment of mutual assessment. Hannah saw him notice everything: the patches in the roof, the leaning chicken coop, the pile of wood that wouldn't last 2 weeks. Her bleeding hands wrapped around the axe handle. She waited for the pity to appear in his eyes, the condescending sympathy she'd seen from everyone since Thomas died. It never came. Instead, Jonas Hale looked at her like she was a force of nature, like her standing there with an axe and bleeding hands was the most natural thing in the world. "Winter's coming fast," he said finally. "I'm aware. That roof won't hold snow. I'll manage." The Hendersons lost their barn last winter. Snow weight brought it down flat. Hannah's jaw tightened. The Hendersons had 3 strong sons and a thriving farm. "As I said, Mr. Hale, I'll manage." He nodded slowly as if he'd expected this response. Then he said the words that changed everything. Words delivered with the same certainty other men used to state the sun would rise. "Marry me, Hannah Cole. By winter's end, you'll carry my child." The axe slipped from her nerveless fingers, embedding itself in the ground between them. The world seemed to tilt, the morning sun suddenly too bright, the wind too loud. Of all the things she'd expected, threats, propositions, offers to buy her out, this hadn't even existed in the realm of possibility. "You're insane," she whispered. Maybe. He hadn't moved, hadn't stepped forward or back, just stood there like he'd grown from the prairie soil. "But I'm also right. You don't even know me. I know enough." "What could you possibly know?" For the first time, something shifted in his expression, a softness that transformed his weathered features. "I know you dug your husband's grave alone because you couldn't bear to wait for help. I know you've been mending that roof yourself, even though Jim Patterson offered to help 3 times. I know you sold your plow horse to Ben Stewart for half what it was worth because he was the only buyer who wouldn't gossip about your circumstances." Hannah's breath caught. "How?" "I pay attention," he said simply. "And I know something else. You're going to die out here this winter, either from cold or starvation or sheer stubborn pride. Your husband's been gone 6 weeks. The ground's about to freeze solid. You've got maybe 300 pounds of firewood when you need 3,000. That roof won't last the first real snow, and when it caves, you'll freeze if the collapse doesn't kill you outright." Each word was a hammer blow of truth. Hannah wanted to deny them, to rage against his presumption, but he was right. God help her, he was right about all of it. "So you're what, offering to save me?" The bitterness in her voice could have curdled milk. "The poor helpless widow needs a big strong man." "No." His response was immediate and firm. "I'm offering a partnership. You need what I can provide: protection, stability, strength for the heavy work. I need what you can give, which is a home, children, someone who won't run when things get hard." He paused, and for a moment she saw something flicker across his face. Vulnerability, maybe, or old pain. "I've got 600 acres of the finest grazing land in the territory, a house that stood through 5 winters, and enough cattle to keep us comfortable. What I don't have is a reason to build anything more than survival." Hannah stared at him, this giant of a man who spoke of children and home, with the same directness other men used to discuss cattle prices. "You could have any woman in the territory. Sarah Mills has been making eyes at you for 2 years. Sarah Mills would take 1 winter out here and run back to her father's store." He shook his head. "I don't want someone who needs rescuing, Mrs. Cole. I want someone who's already survived the worst and kept standing. And you think that's me?" "I know it is." He gestured to the homestead around them. "Any other woman would have left already. Gone back east, moved to town, found family to take her in. You're out here swinging an axe with bloody hands rather than give up. That's the kind of woman who builds something lasting." Hannah bent to retrieve the axe, needing something to do with her hands, needing to look away from those steady gray eyes. "You said by winter's end I'd carry your child. That's a bold promise for a man to make." "It's not a promise, it's a certainty." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're that confident in your abilities." For the first time since he'd arrived, Jonas Hale smiled. It transformed his face, completely turning him from intimidating to almost boyish. "I'm confident in compatibility, Mrs. Cole. My grandmother used to say that when the right 2 people come together, children follow like spring follows winter. She had 11 babies with my grandfather, and they started their marriage as strangers in an arranged match." "This isn't the old country, Mr. Hale." No, but the frontier has its own laws, doesn't it? He replaced his hat, the gesture somehow signaling a shift in the conversation. I'm not asking for an answer today. I know it's sudden. But I also know winter waits for no one. He moved toward his horse, and Hannah found herself speaking before she could stop herself. Why me? Really? Why? Jonas turned back, and this time there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite name. Loneliness, perhaps, or a recognition of kindred spirits. 3 years ago, I watched you at the harvest dance. Thomas was already sick, though nobody knew it yet. He couldn't manage more than one dance, but you stayed by his side all night, turning down every other offer, making sure he didn't feel diminished. You could have danced with younger men, healthier men, but you chose loyalty. He paused, gathering words like a man gathering courage. Then last year, when the Paulson family's crops failed, you gave them half your preserves. You barely had enough yourself, but you shared anyway. And when little Mary Patterson was sick with fever, you sat with her 3 nights straight, even though your own husband was declining. Hannah's throat tightened. She hadn't known anyone had noticed these things. I'm offering marriage, Mrs. Cole, but I'm also offering time. Court me through the winter. Let me prove I'm worth the risk. If come spring you want no part of it, I'll help you get to wherever you want to go, back east to California, wherever. But give me the winter to show you what we could build together. And if I say no right now, he mounted his horse in one fluid motion, settling into the saddle like a king on a throne. Then I'll respect your decision, and you'll never see me again. But I'll also watch for the smoke from your chimney every day, and when it stops coming, which it will, I'll ride over here and bury you proper next to your husband, because that's what neighbors do. The brutal honesty of it should have angered her. Instead, it felt like the first truly honest thing anyone had said to her since Thomas died. Everyone else offered empty platitudes, promises that everything would be fine, assertions that God had a plan. Jonas Hale offered truth and choice, nothing more or less. I need time to think, she heard herself say. Fair enough. He touched the brim of his hat. I'll be back tomorrow with some firewood. Not as a suitor, just as a neighbor. The decision about the rest is yours. He rode away without looking back, leaving Hannah standing there with an axe in her hands and his impossible proposition ringing in her ears. By winter's end, you'll carry my child. The audacity of it should have offended her. The presumption should have enraged her. Instead, for the first time in 6 weeks, she felt something other than grief and exhaustion. She felt possibility. That night, Hannah sat by her meager fire, Thomas's wedding ring on its chain catching the firelight as she moved. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, and she could hear mice in the pantry bold now that food was scarce. She thought about Jonas Hale's offer, turning it over in her mind like a river stone, feeling for sharp edges. Marriage to a near stranger. It went against everything she'd been raised to believe about love and matrimony. Her own parents had courted for 2 years before marrying a proper Eastern courtship full of chaperoned walks and Sunday dinners. She and Thomas had known each other 6 months before he proposed, and even that had seemed rushed to her mother. But the frontier had different rules, didn't it? Out here, survival trumped propriety every time. She thought about the Larsons 2 homesteads over. They'd met on a Monday and married that Friday because winter was coming and neither could manage alone. 5 years later, they had 3 children, and the kind of working partnership that might not be love, but was something sturdy and real. Then there were the Brewsters, who'd courted properly for a full year only for Mr. Brewster to abandon his wife and infant daughter when the farming got too hard. Time and propriety guaranteed nothing. Jonas Hale was offering honesty at least, a business proposition with clearly stated terms. Hannah pulled Thomas's coat tighter around her shoulders. What would he think of this Thomas, who'd promised her the moon and stars, but couldn't even finish a rocking chair Thomas, who'd loved her truly but had also left her with debts he'd hidden and dreams he'd never had the strength to achieve? She'd loved Thomas, loved him with the kind of first love that felt like it could move mountains. But love hadn't kept him from dying. Love hadn't prepared her for this bitter survival. Love was a luxury the frontier didn't always allow. The next morning, true to his word, Jonas appeared with a wagon full of split wood. He didn't come to the door, didn't try to engage her in conversation. He simply unloaded the wood, stacking it neatly against the house with the kind of methodical precision that spoke of long practice. Hannah watched from the window, Noting how he worked steady efficient without any of the showing off she might have expected from a man trying to impress a woman. When he was nearly finished, she stepped outside with a cup of coffee, the last of her supply. "Thank you," she said, offering him the cup. He accepted it with a nod, his fingers brushing hers as he took it. His hands were warm despite the cold morning, and she noticed they were calloused but clean, the hands of a man who worked hard but took care with himself. "It's not charity," he said after a long sip. "Neighbors help neighbors." "We're not neighbors. Your land is 5 miles north." 5 miles is neighbors out here." He handed back the empty cup. "Your chicken coop needs fixing. I could come by tomorrow if you'd like." "I can manage." "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to." There was something in the way he said it, without condescension, without implying weakness, that made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had offered help without making her feel diminished by needing it? "Are you going to come every day?" she asked. "If you'll let me." "And if I don't?" He shrugged a movement like a mountain shifting. "Then I'll respect that, but the offer stands: marriage, partnership, or just neighborly help. Your choice, your terms." Most men wouldn't be so patient. Most men haven't spent 3 years watching and waiting. He moved toward his wagon, then paused. "I know you loved him, Mrs. Cole. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm not trying to replace him or make you forget. I'm offering something different, something that might grow into love or might not, but will keep us both alive and building either way." After he left, Hannah found herself thinking about his words. Something that might grow into love or might not. There was honesty in that too. How many marriages started with grand passion and ended in bitter disappointment? How many started as partnerships and grew into something deeper? She spent the day working, trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythms of survival. She patched another hole in the roof, fed the remaining chickens, tried to stretch the flour into something resembling bread. But her mind kept returning to Jonas Hale, to his steady presence and startling proposition. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, Hannah made a decision. She took Thomas's ring from around her neck and held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight. "I'll always love you," she whispered to the empty room. "But I need to live." She placed the ring in the small wooden box where she kept her few precious things. Her mother's prayer book, a photograph of her parents, the deed to the land. Then she sat at the rough table Thomas had built their first month here and began to make a list of questions for Jonas Hale. If she was going to consider this, really consider it, she needed to know more. Not about his land or his cattle or his ability to provide. She needed to know about the man himself. The next day, when Jonas arrived to fix the chicken coop, Hannah was ready. "Tell me about your family, she said, handing him nails as he worked. He glanced at her, perhaps surprised by the directness, but answered readily enough. "Parents died when I was 15. Cholera took them and my 2 sisters within a week. I've got an uncle in Missouri who offered to take me in, but I headed west instead." "Why, nothing left for me there but ghosts." He hammered a board into place with 2 efficient strikes. "Out here you can build something new without the old always looking over your shoulder." Hannah understood that. It was part of why she and Thomas had come west, to escape the expectations and judgments of their families back east. No other family. None that claim me. Something in his tone suggested a story there, but Hannah didn't push. Everyone on the frontier had stories they didn't tell. "And you've never married?" His hand stilled for a moment. "Almost. When I was 22, girl named Elizabeth back in Kansas. We were engaged, planning a wedding. Then she met a banker's son who could give her silk dresses and a house with glass windows." He resumed working, his movements perhaps a bit more forceful than necessary. "Can't say I blamed her. I was nobody then, just a hand on another man's ranch with big dreams and empty pockets. But you're not nobody now." "No," he agreed. "Now I've got land and cattle and money in the bank. Everything Elizabeth wanted, just 13 years too late." "Do you still love her?" Jonas looked at her directly, then those gray eyes steady and honest. "No, haven't for years, but it taught me something valuable. Love without partnership is just pretty words. Partnership without love at least builds something real." "That's a cynical view." "Is it?" He gestured around them. "You loved your husband true, didn't you?" But love didn't teach him to finish what he started, didn't make him tell you about the debts, didn't keep him strong enough to survive. I'm not saying love isn't valuable, Mrs. Cole. I'm saying it's not enough by itself. Hannah wanted to argue to defend Thomas and their love, but the words died in her throat. Because he was right. She had loved Thomas with everything in her, and it hadn't been enough. They worked in silence for a while, Jonas fixing the coop while Hannah gathered eggs from the nesting boxes. There was something comfortable about the shared labor, the simple rhythm of necessary tasks. You said you wanted children, Hannah said eventually. Why? Jonas secured the last board and stood dusting his hands on his pants. My father used to say that a man who doesn't plant trees for the next generation is just taking up space. I've built something good here, something that could last. But without family to pass it on to, what's the point? When I die, the land will go to strangers or back to the territory. Everything in my life fading like footprints in snow. And if I can't give you children, women my age sometimes can't. You're 30, not 50. He gathered his tools with methodical care. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't. I'd rather try and fail with the right woman than succeed with the wrong one. And you think I'm the right woman based on what a few observations from a distance? Based on how you're still standing when most would have fallen. He moved toward his wagon, then turned back. I'm not a complicated man, Mrs. Cole. I say what I mean. I work hard. I keep my promises. I can't offer you poetry or grand romance, but I can offer you certainty. With me, you'll never wonder where you stand or what's coming next. That might not sound like much. It sounds like everything, Hannah said before she could stop herself. Jonas studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Hope maybe carefully controlled, but definitely there. Think on it, he said finally. No rush, no pressure. Winter's just starting. But they both knew that was a lie. Winter waited for no one, and every day she delayed was a day closer to the brutal months when one person alone might not survive. That night another storm rolled in, rattling the walls and sending snow through every gap in the roof. Hannah huddled by the fire, wrapped in every blanket she owned, and made her decision. The next morning she was waiting when Jonas arrived. She'd put on her best dress, the blue one she'd worn to her wedding, though it hung looser now, after weeks of sparse eating. She'd pinned her hair up properly for the first time since Thomas's funeral. Jonas stopped in the doorway, taking in her appearance, and she saw him understand immediately. I have condition, she said without preamble. I'd expect nothing less. First, we court properly through December. You visit, we talk, we learn each other. No assumptions, no presumptions. Agreed. Second, if we marry, I keep this land in my name. It was Thomas's dream, and I won't dishonor that. Fair. We can add it to my holdings, make it part of the larger ranch. Third, and here her voice wavered slightly. I need time before the physical aspects of marriage. I'm not ready to... You'll come to me when you're ready, Jonas said simply. Not before. I'm patient, Mrs. Cole. I've waited 3 years. I can wait longer. Something in her chest loosened at his words, a fear she hadn't fully acknowledged dissipating. And if I'm never ready, then we'll be the talk of the territory, the giant and his wife who live like siblings. He shrugged. There are worse things to be gossiped about. You say that now? I say it and mean it. He stepped closer still, maintaining a respectful distance, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I want you willing or not at all. A man who has to force his wife to his bed is no man at all. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas had never forced her, but there had been times, especially near the end, when he was desperate to prove his failing vitality, when she'd felt obligated to accommodate him despite her exhaustion and worry. Then I accept, she said. We court through December, and if we suit, we marry in January. Jonas extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Hannah took it. His grip was firm but gentle, the handshake of equals entering a bargain. One more thing, he said, not releasing her hand immediately. You should know there will be talk. People will say I'm taking advantage, that you're selling yourself, that it's too soon after your husband's passing. Let them talk, Hannah said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. They're not the ones trying to survive out here. No, Jonas agreed, finally releasing her hand. They're not. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Hannah had experienced with Thomas. With her first husband, there had been stolen kisses and whispered promises, grand declarations, and passionate arguments. With Jonas, there was something different, a steady building of understanding, like watching a house rise board by board. He came every day, always, with some practical purpose, fixing the roof, reinforcing the walls, teaching her how to better insulate against the cold. But while they worked, they talked. Or rather, Hannah talked, and Jonas listened with the kind of attention she'd never experienced before. She told him about growing up in Boston, the youngest daughter of a schoolteacher who'd insisted all his children learn to read and write and think for themselves. About meeting Thomas at a church social, how his dreams of Western adventure had seemed so romantic to a girl who'd never been further than Concord. He painted such pictures with his words, she said one afternoon as they worked to secure new tar paper on the roof. Golden wheat fields as far as the eye could see, a house full of children, prosperity from honest work. It all seemed so possible when he described it. Dreams often do, Jonas said, holding the paper steady while she hammered. It's the doing that shows what's real. You think I was foolish. I think you were young and in love. Nothing foolish about that. The foolishness is in not learning from it. And what did you learn from your Elizabeth? Jonas considered this, his movements never pausing in their steady rhythm. That there's a difference between wanting someone and wanting a life with someone. Elizabeth wanted me, or thought she did, but she didn't want the life I was building. Soon as something easier came along, she took it. Maybe she just wanted security. Nothing wrong with that, but she could have been honest about it instead of talking about love eternal while eyeing the banker's son. There was old hurt in his voice, scarred over, but still tender in places. Hannah recognized it, the same tone she used when talking about Thomas's hidden debts. We're a pair, aren't we? She said. Both of us nursing wounds from people who said they loved us. Maybe that's why we might work, Jonas suggested. No illusions between us, just truth. As December progressed, Hannah found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that surprised her. It wasn't romantic excitement, not the butterfly feeling she'd had waiting for Thomas. It was something else, something steadier. Like looking forward to sunrise, knowing it would come without fail. Jonas never tried to kiss her, never made any physical advances beyond helping her down from the wagon or steadying her on icy ground. But there was an awareness between them, a consciousness of each other's presence that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as a blizzard raged outside, Jonas stayed later than usual waiting for a break in the storm. They sat by the fire, Hannah mending one of his shirts. Something that had become routine without either of them discussing it, while he whittled a piece of wood into something she couldn't quite identify. What are you making? She asked. You'll see. His hands moved with surprising delicacy for their size-coaxing shapes from the wood with patient skill. You're good at that. My father taught me, said a man should know how to create something beautiful, not just functional. He glanced up at her. He'd have liked you. Why? He respected women who could stand on their own. My mother was like that, strong, capable. When fever took her, something in him broke. He followed her within the year, just gave up. That's romantic in a tragic way. That's foolish, hon, Jonas corrected, but gently. He had 3 children who needed him, and he chose to follow her into the grave rather than stay and raise us. My sisters died because he wasn't there to care for them properly when the cholera came. Hannah's hands stilled on the mending. You raised them alone. For a few months. I was 13, they were 10 and 8. Did my best, but he shrugged, the movement heavy with old grief. Cholera doesn't care how hard you try. I'm sorry. Long time ago now. But it taught me something. Love that makes you weak, that makes you forget your responsibilities. That's not love. It's selfishness, dressed up pretty. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire crackling and the storm howling its fury outside. Hannah found herself studying Jonas's profile in the firelight, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many suns, the surprising gentleness of his expression when he thought no one was looking. He wasn't handsome the way Thomas had been handsome. Thomas had been like a sunset spectacular, attention-grabbing, impossible to ignore. Jonas was like a mountain, solid, enduring, beautiful in a way that revealed itself slowly. Tell me something nobody knows about you, she said suddenly. Jonas looked up surprised. Why, if we're to marry, we should know each other's secrets. He considered this, his knife pausing in its careful work. I write letters to my sisters sometimes. Have for 20 years. Never send them, obviously. Just write them, tell them about my life, what I'm building. Keep them in a box under my bed. Hannah felt her heart constrict. Jonas, that's foolish, I know. I was going to say beautiful. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something passed between them, understanding maybe, or recognition. Two damaged people seeing each other clearly. Your turn, he said. Tell me a secret. Hannah set down the mending, gathering courage. Sometimes I'm angry at Thomas, furious even. Not for dying, he couldn't help that, but for all the small lies, the unfinished promises, the way he let me believe we were building something solid, when really we were building on sand. Nothing wrong with anger. It's honest, at least. I loved him. I know, but love and anger aren't opposites. They're both caring enough to feel something. The opposite of love is indifference. Speaking from experience, I haven't been angry at Elizabeth in 10 years. Haven't thought of her much at all until recently. But my sisters, my father, I'm still angry at them for leaving. Guess that means I still love them too. The storm was beginning to ease, the wind's howl diminishing to a moan. Jonas stood setting aside his whittling. I should go before it starts up again. Hannah stood too suddenly reluctant for him to leave. The house would feel emptier now, having had his presence fill it. At the door, Jonas paused, then pulled something from his pocket. I was going to wait until Christmas, but he handed her what he'd been whittling, a perfect miniature rocking horse detailed down to the flowing mane and tail. Jonas, Hannah turned it over in her hands, marveling at the skill required to create something so delicate. For the children, he said simply. When they come. The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, she found it comforting. In a world where Thomas's promises had evaporated like morning dew, Jonas's certainty felt like bedrock. Thank you, she said, and impulsively rose on her toes to kiss his cheek. He went very still, and she felt him stop breathing for a moment. Then carefully, as if she might spook like a wild horse, he touched the spot where her lips had been. Hannah, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. Yes, we're going to be good together. It wasn't a question or a hope. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same certainty he'd shown that first day. And standing there in her doorway, snow swirling behind him and a tiny wooden horse in her hands, Hannah believed him. The days between Christmas and New Year passed in a blur of preparations and whispered gossip that reached Hannah even in her isolation. Jonas had proposed formally on Christmas Eve, going down on one knee in the snow outside her door, despite her protests that they'd already agreed to marry. A woman deserves to be asked proper, he'd said, producing a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. Hannah Cole, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? She'd said yes, of course they'd already agreed to it, but something about the formal asking about Jonas making himself vulnerable by kneeling in the snow had moved her in ways she hadn't expected. Now, with their wedding set for the second Sunday in January, the entire territory seemed to have an opinion about their union. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after Christmas, when Martha Henderson arrived unannounced, her wagon loaded with what appeared to be half her pantry. Hannah heard the approaching wagon and stepped outside, expecting Jonas, only to find Martha's disapproving face glaring down at her. So it's true then, Martha said without preamble, climbing down from her seat with the determination of a woman on a mission. You're marrying Jonas Hale before your husband's even cold in the ground. Hannah's spine straightened. Thomas has been gone 3 months, Martha. 3 months? Martha's voice rose to a pitch that could have shattered glass. My dear proper mourning is a year at minimum. What will people think? That I'm practical. Hannah replied, moving to help unload the supplies despite her irritation. She wouldn't turn down food out of pride. Or would you prefer I freeze to death out here alone to satisfy propriety? Martha's mouth pinched into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. There are other options. You could move to town, take in sewing work. You could go back east to your people. What people? Hannah hefted a sack of flour, noting it was the good kind, not the dusty remnants she'd been using. My parents are dead, my sister's married and scattered, and sewing work in town. How much do you think that pays Martha enough for room and board? Maybe if I'm lucky. Enough to slowly starve while maintaining respectability. Better than selling yourself to the first man who offers. The words hit like a slap. Hannah set down the flour with careful control, turning to face Martha fully. Is that what you think I'm doing? Selling myself, Martha had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but she pressed on. What else would you call it? Jonas Hale shows up the minute your husband's gone, makes you an offer no desperate woman could refuse. It's unseemly, Hannah. The man's a giant, for heaven's sake. People say he can lift a full-grown steer. Imagine what he could do to a woman if he had a mind to. Jonas would never hurt me. You don't know that. You barely know him at all. Hannah thought of all the quiet conversations by the fire, the patient way Jonas listened when she talked about Thomas, the letters he wrote to his dead sisters. I know enough. Do you know why he's really never married a man like that, with land and money, staying alone all these years? There are stories, Hannah. There are always stories. Martha leaned in conspiratorially. They say he killed a man back in Kansas, beat him to death with his bare hands. Hannah had heard this rumor at Thomas's funeral, whispered behind hands, while Jonas stood in the back paying his respects. And did they say why? Does it matter? A violent man is a violent man. It matters if the man he killed was attacking a woman, Hannah said quietly. It matters if he was stopping a rape. Martha's eyes widened. How did you? Jonas told you? He didn't have to, but thank you for confirming it. Hannah resumed unloading the wagon, hiding her satisfaction. She'd suspected the truth behind the rumor, and Martha's reaction had just verified it. You're making a mistake, Martha said, but with less conviction now. What would Thomas think? Thomas is dead, Hannah said flatly. He doesn't get to think anything anymore. That's what death means, Martha. The living keep living and the dead stay silent. Martha left shortly after, clearly unsettled by Hannah's bluntness. But she wouldn't be the last visitor. Over the next week, a parade of neighbors found reasons to stop by, each with their own opinion about her impending marriage. Sarah Mills came next, pretty Sarah who'd been chasing Jonas for 2 years. She arrived with her father on New Year's Day, ostensibly to deliver a bolt of fabric for Hannah's wedding dress. It's good wool, Sarah said, running her fingers over the dark blue material. Though I suppose you won't have much use for fine things out on Jonas's ranch. He lives quite rough, I hear. No woman's touch at all in that house. Then it's good I'll be there to provide one, Hannah replied, accepting the fabric with genuine gratitude despite Sarah's barbs. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed, Hannah noticed, and her hands shook slightly as she smoothed her skirts. I just don't understand, the younger woman burst out suddenly. I've made it so clear I was interested. I'm younger, prettier. I don't have another man's memory hanging over me. Why you? Her father made a shocked sound, but Hannah raised a hand to quiet him. Sarah deserved an answer even if she wouldn't like it. Because I'm not younger or prettier, Hannah said gently. Because I do have another man's memory. Because I know what it means to lose everything and keep standing. Jonas doesn't need a decoration, Sarah. He needs a partner. I could have been that. Could you butcher a hog, birth a calf in a blizzard, work from dawn to dusk without complaining? Could you bury your dreams and keep living anyway? Sarah's face crumpled. That sounds horrible. That's life out here. And that's why he chose me. Not because I'm better than you, but because I've already survived the worst of it. Benjamin Stewart arrived the next day with his son Jim, both of them armed despite the social visit. Hannah tensed when she saw the rifles, but invited them in for coffee anyway. We're here about Jonas Hale, Benjamin said, without preamble, accepting the weak coffee she could offer. Man to man, so to speak, since you don't have anyone to look out for your interests. I can look out for myself. Do you know Jonas owns the water rights to this whole section? Marry him and he controls everything. Don't marry him and come spring, he could dry you out completely. Hannah hadn't known this, and the revelation sat uneasily in her stomach. Jonas wouldn't do that. Maybe not, but he could. That's power, Mrs. Cole. The kind of power that corrupts even good men. Young Jim leaned forward. My pa's trying to scare you, but there's another side to it. Jonas has protected those water rights from the big cattle companies trying to move in. Without him, we'd all have been dried out and bought out years ago. Benjamin shot his son a dark look. Whose side are you on, boy? The side of truth, Pa. Mrs. Cole deserves to know all of it, not just the parts that make Jonas look bad. And what's the whole truth? Hannah asked Jim. Jonas Hale's the reason half of us are still here. He stood up to the cattle barons, the railroad men, anyone who tried to push out the small farmers. Yes, he's got power, but he's used it to protect folks, not hurt them. Power's power, Benjamin insisted. Today he protects, tomorrow he could destroy. Then I guess I'll have to trust in his character, Hannah said. Just like you trust in it every time you water your cattle from the stream he controls. Benjamin had no answer for that, but the worst visit came on January 3rd, just 10 days before the wedding. Hannah was attempting to alter her old blue dress into something suitable for a wedding when she heard multiple wagons approaching. Through the window, she saw what looked like half the territory's women, led by Reverend Patterson's wife, Eleanor. Eleanor Patterson was the unofficial moral authority of the territory, a position she'd claimed by virtue of being married to the only minister in 50 miles. She swept into Hannah's house like an avenging angel, followed by 6 other women, including Martha Henderson, who at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. We're here for an intervention, Eleanor announced. I don't recall inviting you, Hannah said, setting aside her sewing. Desperate women rarely ask for help. That's why we must offer it unsolicited. Eleanor settled herself in Thomas's old chair like she owned it. We cannot stand by and watch you make this terrible mistake. And what mistake is that? Marrying a man you don't love, betraying your late husband's memory, entering into what is clearly a business arrangement masquerading as holy matrimony. Hannah looked around the room at the gathered women, most of whom she'd considered friends. How many of you married for love? Silence greeted her question. Martha. You told me once your father arranged your marriage to Henry. Eleanor. Didn't you marry Reverend Patterson because your parents thought it would be advantageous, Mrs. Garrett? You came out here as a mail-order bride, sight unseen. That's different, Eleanor protested. How? We weren't widows. We didn't have dead husbands to betray. Hannah felt something snap inside her, sharp and clean, like a breaking bone. Betray. You want to talk about betrayal. Where were all of you when Thomas was dying? Where were you when I was digging his grave alone? Where were you when my roof was caving in and I was down to my last cup of flour? We didn't know. You didn't want to know. It's easier to gossip about the poor widow than to actually help her. But now that I've found a solution that doesn't require your charity or your pity, suddenly you're all concerned about my moral welfare. Jonas Hale is dangerous, Eleanor said, playing her last card. There are things you don't know. Then tell me. Eleanor glanced at the other women, gathering courage from their nods. He was engaged before to a girl named Elizabeth. She broke it off, and within a month, she was dead. Hannah's blood chilled. How? Wagon accident. Her brake line snapped on a hill. And you're suggesting Jonas had something to do with it. I'm saying it's suspicious. A strong man like that, good with his hands, knowledgeable about wagons. Was he even in the same town when it happened? Eleanor faltered. Well, no, he'd already left for the territories, but so you're accusing him of somehow causing an accident from hundreds of miles away. Men have their ways. Hannah stood slowly, rage making her movements deliberate. Get out! Hannah, we're trying to help. Get out! She picked up Thomas's old rifle from beside the door, not pointing it at anyone, but making her intentions clear. All of you, get out of my house and don't come back. They left in a flutter of offended propriety and shocked whispers. Only Martha lingered at the door. Hannah, we really are trying to protect you. From what? From surviving. From having a future. Jonas has shown me more genuine kindness in 1 month than Thomas did in 2 years of marriage, and certainly more than any of you have shown since Thomas died. Martha flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? You brought me supplies, yes, and I'm grateful. But you also came to judge me to make yourself feel morally superior. That's not kindness, Martha. That's self-righteousness with a side of charity. After they left, Hannah sank into her chair, shaking. The visit had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. Not because she believed their accusations, but because it forced her to confront a truth she'd been avoiding. She was starting to care for Jonas in ways that had nothing to do with survival. She thought of him constantly when he wasn't there. The way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled. The careful way he handled delicate things despite his massive hands. The patience in his voice when he explained something. The way he looked at her not with pity or condescension, but with respect and something else, something that made her stomach flutter in ways she'd thought died with Thomas. That evening, Jonas arrived for dinner as planned, bringing fresh venison and winter vegetables from his root cellar. He took one look at her face and set down his offerings. What happened? Hannah told him about the visits, watching his expression darken with each revelation. When she got to Eleanor's accusation about Elizabeth, he went very still. "You want to know if it's true?" he said. "Not a question. I want to know what happened." Jonas sat heavily in the chair Eleanor had vacated. "Elizabeth broke our engagement for the banker's son like I told you. Month later, she was dead. Wagon accident, just like they said. The brake line had worn through her new husband, was too fancy to check his equipment proper. She died, and he walked away without a scratch. I'm sorry. I was sorry too. Sorry for the waste of it. She was 20 years old, whole life ahead of her, and she died because her husband couldn't be bothered to maintain a wagon." He looked up at Hannah. "But I wasn't sorry for myself. I'd already grieved what we had. Her death was tragic, but it wasn't my tragedy." "People think you killed her." "People think a lot of things. Doesn't make them true." "Doesn't it bother you, the rumors?" Jonas shrugged. "Out here, everyone needs someone to be the villain in their stories. I'm big, I'm quiet, I keep to myself. Makes me an easy target. But the people who matter know better. Jim Stewart defended you, said you've protected the small farmers from the cattle companies. Jim's a good boy, smarter than his father." They prepared dinner together, working in comfortable synchronization. Hannah found herself watching Jonas cut vegetables, noting the precise economical movements. Thomas had always been clumsy in the kitchen, more likely to cut himself than the carrots. "I've been thinking," Jonas said as they ate, "about what Martha said, about me being dangerous. Jonas, she's not wrong. I am dangerous. I've killed 3 men in my life. The one in Kansas that you already know about. A claim jumper who tried to take my land at gunpoint 5 years ago. And a rustler I caught butchering one of my breeding bulls last winter." Hannah absorbed this information, waiting for fear to come. It didn't. "Did they need killing?" "I thought so at the time. Still do." "Then I don't see the problem." Jonas looked at her with something like wonder. Just like that, no horror, no judgment. "I've had to kill 2, Jonas, coyotes mostly, but once a rabid dog that was threatening the chickens. Killing's sometimes necessary out here. The only people who don't understand that are the ones who've never had to protect anything." "You're a remarkable woman, Hannah Cole." "I'm a practical woman. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm sitting." They finished dinner in comfortable silence, then Jonas helped her with the dishes. Another thing Thomas would never have done, considering it women's work. As they worked, Hannah found herself thinking about the approaching wedding with anticipation rather than dread. "I should tell you," Jonas said as he prepared to leave, "there'll likely be more visitors, people trying to talk you out of this. Let them come. My mind's made up. Even knowing what you know now about the men I've killed, about the power I hold over the water rights." Hannah dried her hands, slowly choosing her words. Thomas was a gentle man. Wouldn't hurt a fly, couldn't even butcher a chicken without apologizing to it first. But his gentleness didn't keep us fed. It didn't keep us safe. It didn't even keep him alive. Maybe I don't need gentle. Maybe I need strong. Jonas moved closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "I can be gentle too," he said quietly, "when gentleness is what's needed." "I know." And she did know, had seen it in the way he handled the wooden horse he'd carved, the way he spoke about his sisters, the way he touched her hand when helping her down from the wagon. "Hannah," he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. Would you allow?" He stopped, frustrated with his own tongue-tied attempt. "Yes," she said, understanding what he couldn't ask. He kissed her, then their first kiss, and it was nothing like kissing Thomas. Thomas had kissed like he was trying to consume her all passion and demand. Jonas kissed like he was making a promise slow and careful and thorough. His hand came up to cradle her face, massive but impossibly gentle, and Hannah felt something inside her that had been frozen since Thomas died begin to thaw. When they parted, she was breathless, and he looked stunned. "I should go," he said, but made no move to leave. "Yes," she agreed, not stepping away. They stood there for another long moment, existing in the space between propriety and desire, before Jonas finally forced himself to move toward the door. "1 week," he said. "1 week, and you'll be my wife." "1 week," she echoed and found herself smiling. After he left, Hannah touched her lips, still feeling the phantom pressure of his kiss. Eleanor Patterson and her moral brigade could gossip all they wanted. Hannah had found something worth the risk. The next days brought more visitors, as Jonas had predicted. The banker Bill Garrett came to warn her about the financial implications of marriage, how Jonas would own everything of hers the moment they wed. The sheriff stopped by to ask if she was being coerced. Even Doc Hartley made the journey out ostensibly to check on her health, but really to probe whether she was of sound mind. To all of them, Hannah presented the same calm certainty. She was marrying Jonas Hale of her own free will, in full possession of her faculties with complete understanding of what it meant. But the most unexpected visitor came the day before the wedding. Hannah was trying on her altered dress one final time when she heard a single horse approaching. Through the window, she saw a woman dismounting, tall, severe, dressed in black from head to toe. Hannah didn't recognize her, but something about the woman's bearing, the way she moved, reminded her of someone. When she opened the door, the woman's first words explained everything. "I'm Catherine Hale, Jonas's aunt. The aunt from Missouri, the one who'd offered to take Jonas in after his parents died." Hannah could see the family resemblance now. The same gray eyes, the same strong jaw, softened by age and femininity, but still formidable. "Mrs. Hale, Jonas didn't tell me you were coming." "Jonas doesn't know. I heard about the wedding from a mutual acquaintance. Thought I should meet the woman who finally caught my nephew." Hannah invited her in, noting the woman's sharp assessment of everything: the patched roof, the simple furniture, the altered wedding dress hanging on its peg. "You're not what I expected," Catherine said, accepting a cup of tea. "What did you expect?" "Someone younger, prettier, more obviously after his money." "Sorry to disappoint." Catherine's severe expression cracked slightly, revealing what might have been a smile. "On the contrary, I'm relieved. Jonas has always been susceptible to pretty faces. That Elizabeth creature had him wrapped around her finger until she showed her true colors. You knew Elizabeth. Briefly, vapid little thing, all curls and giggles and not a thought in her head beyond what dress to wear. I tried to warn Jonas, but young men don't listen to old aunts about matters of the heart." "Why didn't Jonas come to you after his parents died?" Catherine's expression softened with old pain. "Pride. Stubborn, stiff-necked Hale pride. His father and I had argued about his moving west. I thought it was foolish, dangerous. When the cholera took them, Jonas probably thought I'd say I told you so. Instead, I just wanted to help, but by the time I reached out, he'd already left for the territories." "Have you been in touch since?" "Letters occasionally. He writes about his ranch, his cattle. Never about himself, never about loneliness or wanting a family. Until his last letter when he mentioned you." "What did he say?" Catherine studied her with those familiar gray eyes. "That he'd found a woman who didn't need saving. That you were like prairie grass bent by storms but never broken. That marrying you would be the smartest thing he'd ever done." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "He said that Jonas doesn't waste words on things he doesn't mean." Catherine set down her teacup with decisive movement. "I came here to see if you were worthy of him. If you were another Elizabeth looking for an easy life. And I see a woman who's chosen survival over surrender. That makes you worthy in my book." She stood smoothing her black skirts. "I'll be at the wedding tomorrow. Someone from Jonas's family should be there, and I'm all he's got." "He'll be glad to see you." "Perhaps. Or perhaps he'll be angry I interfered. Either way, I'll be there." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Mrs. Cole Hannah, can I give you some advice?" "Please." "Jonas looks strong as an ox, and he is. But inside, he's still that 15-year-old boy who lost everyone he loved in the span of a week. He'll test you, push you away to see if you'll leave like everyone else did. Don't let him. When he tries to shoulder everything alone, make him share the burden. When he goes quiet for days, make him talk. He needs someone who won't let him disappear into himself. I understand. I hope you do. Because that man has more love to give than he knows what to do with. It just needs the right person to show him how to let it out. After Catherine left, Hannah sat in the gathering dusk thinking about everything she'd learned. Tomorrow she would marry a man who'd killed to protect what was his, who held the power of life and death over every farm in the area through water rights, who carried letters to dead sisters and still mourned them 20 years later. Tomorrow she would marry a man who saw her as prairie grass, something resilient and necessary and beautiful in its own harsh way. The comparison should have offended her. Instead, it felt like the greatest compliment she'd ever received. That night, Hannah packed her few belongings ready for Jonas to collect them after the wedding. She wrapped the wooden horse he'd carved in a piece of cloth, saving it for the children he was so certain would come. She took Thomas's photograph from its place on the mantel and packed it carefully in her memory box. She wasn't erasing Thomas, but she was making room for Jonas. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of bright January morning that made the snow sparkle like diamonds. Hannah dressed carefully in her altered blue dress, pinning her hair up with the few pins she owned, looking at herself in the cracked mirror Thomas had bought her their first Christmas. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like what she was, a widow, worn down by frontier life, choosing to live rather than merely survive. But in her eyes she saw something that hadn't been there in months: hope. Jonas arrived in his best wagon, cleaned and polished for the occasion. He was wearing a proper suit, probably the only one he owned, and had clearly made an effort to tame his usually wild hair. When he saw her, his face did something she'd never seen before. It lit up completely unguarded joy, transforming his weathered features. "You look beautiful," he said, helping her into the wagon. "I look tired," she corrected. "Beautiful," he insisted, and the way he said it made her believe him. The ride to town was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that would define so much of their life together. As they neared the church, Hannah saw the crowd gathered outside and tensed. It looked like the entire territory had turned out. "We could go to the justice of the peace instead," Jonas offered, sensing her discomfort. "No, let them look. Let them gossip. We've got nothing to hide." But as they pulled up to the church, Hannah saw something unexpected. Yes, Eleanor Patterson was there with her disapproving frown. Yes, Martha Henderson looked scandalized. But Jim Stewart stood near the door with a smile, and beside him Doc Hartley nodded approvingly. The Larsons were there, the couple who'd married after knowing each other a week, and they were holding hands. Even cranky Bill Garrett had shown up, though he stood apart from the others. And there near the church steps stood Catherine Hale, in her severe black dress, waiting. Jonas stopped dead when he saw her. "Aunt Catherine." "Don't just stand there gaping, boy. You've got a wedding to get to." Jonas crossed to her in 3 strides, and to Hannah's amazement swept the older woman into a careful hug. Catherine protested but didn't pull away, and Hannah saw her hands clutch at Jonas's jacket for just a moment before she composed herself. "I didn't think you'd come," Jonas said. "Someone had to make sure you didn't mess this up." Catherine straightened his tie with brisk efficiency. "Your mother would haunt me if I let you get married without family present." The ceremony itself was simple. Reverend Patterson clearly disapproved, but performed his duty with professional grace. Hannah and Jonas stood before the small congregation, making vows they both meant to keep. For better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. When Reverend Patterson reached the part about anyone objecting, there was a long, tense pause. Hannah could feel Eleanor willing someone to speak up to stop this improper union. But silence reigned, and the Reverend continued with visible reluctance. "You may kiss your bride," he said, finally, the words sour in his mouth. Jonas kissed her gently, appropriately. Nothing like the kiss they'd shared in her kitchen, but his hand squeezed hers, a promise of more when they were alone. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Hannah saw a mix of expressions. Disapproval from some, yes, but also understanding from others. These were frontier people. They knew about hard choices and survival. Outside the church, as people milled about, uncertain whether to offer congratulations or condemnations. Jim Stewart was the first to approach. Best wishes, Mrs. Hale, he said, and Hannah startled at her new name. Jonas, you got yourself a good woman. I know, Jonas said simply. Others followed Jim's lead, offering tentative congratulations. Even Martha Henderson managed a tight smile and a muttered, good luck. But it was Catherine who provided the moment Hannah would remember years later. The older woman approached them as they prepared to leave, pressing something into Hannah's hand. This was my sister's Jonas's mother's, she said. She'd want you to have it. It was a small gold locket on a delicate chain worn smooth with age. Inside was a tiny photograph of a young couple, clearly Jonas's parents looking at each other with obvious devotion. Thank you, Hannah managed through a tight throat. Catherine nodded briskly, then turned to Jonas. You write more often, you hear, and not just about cattle. Yes, ma'am. As they drove away from the church, heading toward Jonas's ranch. Their ranch now. Hannah fingered the locket around her neck. She was no longer Hannah Cole, the desperate widow. She was Hannah Hale, wife of Jonas' stepmother to 600 acres and 200 head of cattle. The house, when they reached it, was exactly as Sarah Mills had said, clearly a bachelor's domain, functional but lacking any softness. But it was solid, well built, with good bones and proper insulation. It would keep out the winter, and that was what mattered. I know it's not much, Jonas said, carrying her few boxes inside. Nothing like what you probably dreamed of. Hannah looked around the sparse main room, already mentally placing furniture, hanging curtains, adding the touches that would make it home. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. That first night as husband and wife, Jonas was true to his word. He showed her to a bedroom, her bedroom separate from his. When you're ready, chum, he said simply. Not before. Hannah stood in the doorway of her new room, looking at this man she'd married, this giant who could kill with his hands but who touched her like she was made of spun glass. Jonas, she said, what if I'm never ready? What if I can't give you children? He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Then we'll be the oddest couple in the territory, the giant and his wife who live like monks. And that'll be fine too, because you'll still be here, and that's all I really wanted. You said by winter's end I'd carry your child. You were so certain. I'm certain we're meant to build something together. Children would be wonderful, but if that's not what we build, we'll build something else. A legacy doesn't have to be blood, Hannah. It can be land-protected, neighbors, helped a life lived well together. She reached up, touching his face, feeling the beginning of stubble on his jaw. You're not what I expected when you rode up to my homestead that day. What did you expect? A brute. A man who wanted a woman for the obvious reasons. Instead, I got... She paused, searching for words. What did you get? A good man, she said simply. I got a good man who writes letters to his dead sisters and carves toy horses for children who don't exist yet and kisses like he's making promises. Is that enough? Hannah thought of Thomas of love that burned bright and fast and left nothing but ashes. Then she looked at Jonas, steady as a mountain, patient as the seasons. It's more than enough, she said. It's everything. The first month of marriage passed in a careful dance of learning each other's rhythms. Hannah woke before dawn each day to find Jonas already gone out checking cattle or mending fences, leaving fresh coffee warming on the stove and firewood stacked by the hearth. She'd fallen into her own routines, baking bread, organizing the sparse kitchen, slowly transforming the bachelor house into something that felt like home. They ate meals together, worked side by side when needed, and each night retired to their separate rooms with polite goodnights that left Hannah increasingly restless. It was the end of February when everything changed. Hannah had just finished hanging new curtains she'd sewn from fabric Jonas brought from town when she heard his horse galloping hard toward the house. Through the window, she saw him riding fast, too fast for safety, and her heart clenched with familiar dread. The last time she'd seen someone ride like that, it was the neighbor coming to tell her Thomas had collapsed in the field. Jonas burst through the door, his face grim. Get your coat. There's trouble. What kind of trouble? A stranger in town asking questions about you, about Thomas's debts. Hannah's blood ran cold. Thomas didn't have any debts. I paid them all off selling the plow horse and his rifle. This man says different. Says Thomas borrowed $500 from a company back east, put the land up as collateral. He's got papers. $500. It might as well have been 5,000. Hannah sank into a chair, the strength leaving her legs. That's impossible. Thomas would have told me. Jonas knelt beside her chair, his large hands covering hers completely. Hannah, look at me. When she met his eyes, he continued with quiet intensity. I don't care if it's true or not. We'll handle it together. But right now we need to get to town before this man files anything with the courthouse. They rode hard, Jonas keeping one arm around Hannah as she sat sideways on his horse, her own mount being too slow for the urgency required. The town came into view just as the sun reached its peak, and Hannah could see a crowd gathered outside the courthouse. At its center stood a man she'd never seen before, thin, well-dressed, with the kind of oily prosperity that came from other people's misfortune. That's him, Jonas said, helping her down. Name's Blackwood, claims to be a collection agent. Blackwood saw them approaching and smiled, the expression making Hannah's skin crawl. The widow Cole, or should I say Mrs. Hale now. How convenient marrying into money just when your late husband's debts come due. I don't know you, Hannah said, proud that her voice didn't shake. And Thomas didn't have any debts back east. No. Blackwood produced a leather folder, extracting papers with theatrical flourish. Then perhaps you can explain this loan agreement signed by Thomas Cole dated 18 months ago. $500 borrowed from the Eastern Lending Company of Boston with your homestead as collateral. Hannah examined the papers, her heart sinking. It was Thomas's signature, she'd know it anywhere. But the date... This is dated 3 months before we even claimed the homestead. How could he put up land as collateral that he didn't own yet? Blackwood's smile widened. Your husband was a forward-thinking man, Mrs. Hale. He knew he'd be claiming land, so he borrowed against his future property. It's all perfectly legal. It's horse shit, Jonas said flatly, and several people in the crowd gasped at his language. No legitimate company would lend against land that didn't exist yet. Are you calling me a liar, Mr. Hale? I'm calling you what you are. Jonas stepped forward, and Blackwood involuntarily stepped back. A vulture who preys on widows and desperate people. How many others have you done this to? How many families have you destroyed with your forged papers? These papers aren't forged. I have witnesses who saw Thomas Cole sign them. Produce them. Blackwood faltered slightly. They're back in Boston. Convenient. And this Eastern Lending Company, I suppose, they're in Boston too. Of course. Jonas turned to the crowd. Anyone here ever heard of the Eastern Lending Company of Boston? Silence greeted his question. Anyone here ever see Thomas Cole with $500? More silence. That's what I thought. Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd. Now hold on, everyone. Mr. Blackwood here has papers. That means something in the eyes of the law. Papers can be forged, Jonas said. Sheriff, you knew Thomas Cole. Was he the type to borrow money without telling his wife? The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, but men sometimes... Thomas Cole couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it, Martha Henderson interrupted, surprising everyone. That man told Hannah everything, probably more than she wanted to know. He wouldn't have borrowed money for kindling without discussing it with her first. That's right, Jim Stewart added. Thomas was at the general store every week talking about every little decision, asking advice about everything from seed selection to what color to paint the chicken coop. No way he borrowed $500 without everyone knowing about it. Blackwood's composure was cracking. Regardless of what you people think you know, I have legal documentation. If the debt isn't paid within 30 days, I'll be claiming the property. The hell you will, Jonas said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone go still. That land belongs to my wife and now to me. You want to take it, you'll have to go through me. Are you threatening me, Mr. Hale? I'm stating a fact. You can take your papers to any judge you want, but while you're doing that, I'll be sending telegrams to Boston checking on this Eastern Lending Company. I'll be writing to the territorial governor about fraudulent claims being made against homesteaders, and I'll be making sure everyone from here to Chicago knows that a man named Blackwood is running a con game on widows. Blackwood's face had gone red, then white. You can't prove anything. I don't have to prove it, Jonas said. I just have to make enough noise that your next mark knows to look closer at those papers. How many of them will hold up under real scrutiny? The two men faced each other in the dusty street, Blackwood trying to maintain his authority, while Jonas stood immovable as stone. Hannah watched her husband with new understanding. This wasn't the violent man the gossips whispered about. This was something far more dangerous, a man who understood how to use power without ever raising his fist. Finally, Blackwood spoke. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. I'll need to verify some details with my company. You do that, Jonas said. And while you're verifying, you might want to consider moving on to the next town. This one doesn't take kindly to men who prey on widows. Blackwood gathered his papers with shaking hands, backing toward the hotel. This isn't over. Yes, Jonas said simply, it is. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people patted Jonas on the back or nodded approvingly at Hannah. Even Eleanor Patterson managed a grudging look of respect. As they walked back toward their horses, Hannah found her legs shaking. Jonas noticed immediately, guiding her to a bench outside the general store. It's all right, he said quietly. He's done. The signature? Hannah whispered. It really did look like Thomas's. I know. How can you be sure it's fake? Jonas was quiet for a moment, then said, Because I knew Thomas Cole. Not well, but enough. He came to me 2 months before he died, asking for a loan. Said he needed $300 for seed and supplies, promised to pay me back after harvest. Hannah's breath caught. He never told me. I turned him down, Jonas continued, not because I didn't have the money, but because I could see he was already sick. The way he held himself, the exhaustion in his eyes, I knew he wouldn't make it to harvest. Lending him money would have just put you in debt when he died. So he might have gone elsewhere, to this Eastern lending company. Hannah, if Thomas had gotten $500 from anywhere, what would he have done with it? You were scraping by patching the roof with flour sacks. Where did the money go? She thought about it. Really thought about their last months together. The constant worry about supplies, Thomas's frustration at not being able to provide better, the way he'd looked at the failing farm with despair. It didn't exist. He never got any money. No. Blackwood probably has someone who can forge signatures, found Thomas's name in the death records, figured a widow would be easy to intimidate into paying a debt that never existed. But how did you know for sure? Jonas pulled out one of the papers Blackwood had dropped in his haste to gather them. This seal here, it's too new. Lending companies have used raised seals for the past 5 years, not flat ones like this. And the paper, it's the wrong weight for legal documents from Boston. I've dealt with enough Eastern lawyers buying cattle to know the difference. Hannah stared at her husband. You knew all that just from looking. I pay attention, he said, echoing his words from their courtship. It's kept me alive and in business this long. They rode home in thoughtful silence. But that evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Hannah found herself studying Jonas with new eyes. He'd protected her without violence, using intelligence and influence instead of his fists. He'd stood between her and disaster without making her feel weak or incapable. Thank you, she said suddenly, for today, for handling Blackwood. Jonas looked up from the harness he was mending. You're my wife. Protecting you is my job. It was more than that. She set aside her sewing, choosing her words carefully. Thomas would have tried to fight Blackwood physically and probably gotten arrested, or he would have believed the papers were real and despaired. You thought it through. You use strategy, not strength. Strength without strategy is just violence, Jonas said. My father taught me that before he died. Said a smart man wins his battles before they're fought. Your father sounds like he was wise. He was. Wish I'd had more time to learn from him. Jonas returned to his work, but Hannah could see the old grief in the set of his shoulders. She rose from her chair and crossed to where he sat, something she'd never done before in their evening routine. Without overthinking it, she placed her hand on his shoulder. He went very still under her touch. Jonas, she said softly, can I ask you something? Always. Why separate bedrooms, really? Why? His hand stilled on the leather. You know why. You weren't ready. That's not what I mean. She moved to sit in the chair beside him, close enough that their knees almost touched. Most men wouldn't have offered that. They'd have expected their marital rights regardless of the wife's feelings. Why are you different? Jonas set aside the harness, taking his time before answering. My Uncle Catherine's husband, he was a hard man. When I stayed with them those few months before heading west, I saw how he treated her. Never hit her, nothing like that. But he'd take what he wanted when he wanted it, no regard for her wishes. I'd hear her crying sometimes after see her moving stiff and sore the next morning. Hannah's stomach clenched. She'd heard of such marriages, but had been fortunate with Thomas, who'd always been gentle, if not always attentive. I swore I'd never be that kind of man, Jonas continued, that if I married, my wife would come to me willing or not at all. A man who has to force his wife to his bed isn't a man, he's just an animal with legal papers. And if she never comes willing, Jonas looked at her directly, then those gray eyes intense in the firelight. Then I'll have spent my life with a good woman who makes my house a home, who works beside me, who I can talk to in the evenings. That's more than most men get. Hannah felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of a knot she hadn't realized was there. You're a good man, Jonas Hale. I try to be.
No, she said firmly. You are, and I... She paused, gathering courage. I've been thinking about us, about what we're building here. Jonas waited patient as always, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I'm not ready for everything, she said carefully, but I'm ready for something, ready to stop living like polite strangers who happen to share a house. What are you saying? Instead of answering with words, Hannah stood and extended her hand to him. After a moment's hesitation, Jonas took it, letting her pull him to his feet. He towered over her, massive in the small room, but she felt no fear, only a nervous anticipation. Come to bed, Aunt, she said simply. Just to sleep, but together. Jonas's breath caught. Hannah, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. She squeezed his hand. I'm tired of being alone, Jonas. Tired of lying awake wondering what it would be like to have you beside me. I'm not ready for everything, but I'm ready for this. He followed her down the hall to her room, their room now moving like a man in a dream. Hannah's heart was pounding as she turned down the covers. Such a simple domestic act that suddenly felt monumental. She'd shared a bed with Thomas for 2 years, but this felt different. With Thomas, it had been expected part of the natural progression from wedding to wedding night. With Jonas, it was a choice deliberate and considered. They prepared for bed with awkward courtesy, Jonas stepping out while Hannah changed into her nightgown, then Hannah turning away while he removed his shirt and boots. When they finally lay down, one on each side of the bed with a careful space between them, the silence was deafening. This is ridiculous, Hannah said finally, a nervous laugh escaping. We're married adults, not children. Doesn't make it less awkward, Jonas admitted, and she could hear the smile in his voice. She turned on her side to face him, barely able to make out his profile in the darkness. Tell me something, anything. Just talk to me. Jonas was quiet for a moment, then began speaking softly. When I was 7, before my sisters were born, my parents took me to see the ocean. We lived inland, so it was a long journey, took 3 days by wagon. But my mother had grown up near the sea and wanted me to see it. Hannah shifted closer, drawn by his voice. What was it like? Overwhelming. This endless expanse of water stretching beyond the horizon. I was terrified at first, wouldn't go near it. My father laughed, but my mother understood. She took my hand and we walked along the shore, just letting the waves touch our toes. She said the ocean was like life, scary when you face it all at once, but manageable if you take it one wave at a time. She sounds wonderful. She was. Strong but kind. You remind me of her sometimes. Hannah reached out in the darkness, finding his hand. I wish I could have met her. She'd have liked you. Would have said you had good sense marrying me. There was gentle teasing in his voice. Oh, so I have good sense now. The best. After all, you married the richest rancher in the territory. I married the most patient man in the territory, Hannah corrected. The money's just a bonus. Jonas turned his hand to interlace their fingers. Hannah, can I tell you something? Always. I'm terrified. She blinked in the darkness. You terrified of what? Of ruining this. Of pushing too fast or not fast enough. Of waking up to find you've realized you made a mistake. His voice was barely a whisper. I've wanted you for so long, built up so many dreams about what this could be.
What if the reality disappoints you? Hannah's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. This giant of a man who faced down fraudsters and rustlers without flinching was afraid of disappointing her. Jonas, she said, shifting closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You've already exceeded every expectation I had. You gave me time when another man would have demanded immediate compliance. You protected me without diminishing me. You see me as a partner, not a possession. That's just basic decency. No, it's not. Not out here, not anywhere, really. She squeezed his hand. Can I tell you a secret? Please. Sometimes with Thomas, especially toward the end, I felt like I was disappearing. Like I was becoming just an extension of his dreams, his needs, his failures. Mrs. Thomas Cole, never just Hannah, but with you. You see me. The actual me, not just the role I fill. Jonas pulled their joined hands to his chest, and she could feel his heart beating strong and steady. I see you, he confirmed, have since that first harvest dance. You were wearing a yellow dress, and you laughed at something Thomas said, and I thought you were the most real person I'd ever seen. Not performing, not pretending, just yourself. I don't remember you being there. I stayed in the shadows, didn't figure a woman like you would notice a man like me. A woman like me. Educated, refined, from back east with proper manners and correct grammar. Hannah laughed softly. If you could have seen me last week, elbow deep in bread dough covered in flour, cursing at the oven for burning the bottom. Still refined, Jonas insisted. You curse with good grammar. That startled a real laugh out of her, and she felt Jonas's body shake with his own quiet laughter. The tension that had been between them since their wedding night began to ease. This is nice, she said after their laughter faded. Just this. Talking in the dark. It is, Jonas agreed. Then more hesitantly, Hannah, would you let me hold you? Just hold you. For answer, she shifted closer, fitting herself against his side. Jonas's arm came around her carefully, as if she might break, and she rested her head on his chest. He was warm and solid, and his heart beat a little faster under her ear. Is this all right? He asked. More than all right. She was quiet for a moment, then added, Jonas, that certainty you had about me carrying your child by winter's end, what about it? Winter's almost over. I know. You're not disappointed. His arm tightened around her slightly. Hannah, I have you in my bed, our bed of your own free will. You're talking to me, really talking, not just being polite. You're letting me hold you. How could I be disappointed? But you want children. I do, but I want you more. Children might come or they might not. But you're here, and that's what matters. They lay together in the darkness, Hannah listening to Jonas's heartbeat. Jonas's fingers gently stroking her hair. It was intimate without being sexual, close without being demanding. It was Hannah realized exactly what she needed. I could love you, she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Jonas went very still. Starting to, she clarified, her face burning with embarrassment. It's different from what I felt for Thomas. Less like fire, more like watching the sunrise, gradual and warm and inevitable. Jonas finished. I know. I've been watching that sunrise for 3 years. You love me. It wasn't a question. Have for a long time. But love's just a feeling if it doesn't come with action. I'd rather show you than just say it. You have been showing me, every day. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, fully clothed except for Jonas's shirt. It was the best night's sleep either had had in months. The next morning brought new challenges. Hannah woke to find Jonas already up stoking the fire in the kitchen. When she emerged, he looked at her with such naked hope that she crossed to him immediately and kissed his cheek. Good morning, she said. Morning. He touched the spot she'd kissed. Hannah, about last night. No regrets, she said firmly. We move forward, not back. But moving forward proved complicated when, just after breakfast, riders appeared on the horizon. Jonas tensed, reaching for the rifle by the door, then relaxed slightly. It's Jim Stewart and his father, and looks like Sheriff Morrison. Hannah's stomach dropped. Blackwood? We'll see. The three men dismounted, their faces grim. Sheriff Morrison spoke first. "Jonas, Mrs. Hale. I'm afraid there's been a development." "Let me guess," Jonas said dryly. "Blackwood found a judge who likes his paperwork. Judge Carlton from the county seat. He's agreed to hear Blackwood's claim. You're both required to appear in court next week." "Of course we are." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Carlton's the one who sides with the cattle companies every time, isn't he? He's traditional in his views, like," the sheriff said carefully, "believes in the sanctity of contracts and such. Even fraudulent ones. That's for the court to decide." Benjamin Stewart spoke up. "Jonas, this is serious. Carlton's already made comments about homesteaders who don't pay their debts, and with you just marrying Hannah, he thinks we conspired," Hannah said, understanding immediately. "That Jonas married me to protect the land from legitimate creditors." "Something like that," Jim admitted. "Blackwood's been spreading that story around town. Says it's mighty convenient you two marrying just when this debt comes due. The debt that didn't exist until Blackwood showed up," Jonas said flatly. "We know that," Sheriff Morrison said. "Most folks know that, but Judge Carlton only cares about what's on paper." Jonas was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Jim, you still have that cousin who works at the newspaper in Denver, so—" "Charlie, yeah, he's still there. Think he'd be interested in a story about fraudulent creditors preying on homesteaders. Maybe want to investigate this Eastern Lending Company." Jim's face lit up with understanding. "He might at that. Charlie loves a good crusade. And Sheriff, didn't you say your brother works for the Pinkerton Agency?" Morrison nodded slowly. "He does. Might be worth asking if they've heard of anyone named Blackwood running similar schemes elsewhere." Hannah watched her husband work, setting pieces in motion like a chess player, thinking several moves ahead. This was the man who'd built a ranch from nothing, who'd survived alone on the frontier for years. Not through violence, but through intelligence and strategic thinking. After the men left promising to make inquiries, Hannah found Jonas standing at the window, staring out at the vast expanse of snow-covered land. "We could lose it all," he said quietly. "The ranch, the land, everything I've built. We won't." "You sound certain." Hannah moved to stand beside him. "I am certain. You know why. Because you're not facing this alone. You have me. You have neighbors who respect you. You have truth on your side. Truth doesn't always win in court. No, but it helps when you have a smart husband who knows how to use it." She took his hand. "Jonas, worst case scenario, what happens?" He considered. "We lose the land. Have to start over somewhere else. And would that be so terrible, starting fresh together?" Jonas looked down at her, something wondering in his expression. "You'd do that? Leave everything and start over with me?" "I already did that when I married you. The rest is just geography." He pulled her into his arms, then holding her tight against his chest. "How did I get so lucky?" "It's not luck," Hannah said into his shirt. "It's choice. You chose me, I chose you. We choose to face this together." The week before the trial passed in a blur of preparation, Charlie Stewart's article appeared in the Denver paper questioning the legitimacy of Eastern lending companies that preyed on homesteaders. The Pinkerton agent confirmed that a man matching Blackwood's description had run similar schemes in 3 other territories. Jonas wrote letter after letter calling in favors, building a network of support. But it was Hannah who found the crucial piece of evidence. Going through Thomas's papers one more time, she discovered something she'd overlooked before: a receipt from the general store dated the same day Blackwood claimed Thomas had signed the loan papers. The receipt was time-stamped and signed by Mr. Wupim Garrett at the store, proving Thomas had been in town at the exact time Blackwood claimed he'd been in Boston signing documents. "It's not definitive proof," Jonas warned. "A good lawyer could argue Thomas traveled to Boston later that day. From the Dakota Territory to Boston in one day." In 1892, Hannah shook her head. "Even Judge Carlton isn't that foolish." The night before the trial, they lay in their bed fully. Their bed now, as Hannah hadn't returned to sleeping alone, and talked quietly in the darkness. "Are you scared?" Hannah asked. "Terrified," Jonas admitted. But not of losing the land. Then what? Of disappointing you. You married me thinking you were getting security, and instead you got a legal battle and possible bankruptcy. Hannah rose up on one elbow, barely able to see his face in the darkness. Jonas Hale, you listen to me. I married you because you're a good man who sees me as a person, not a possession. The security was just a bonus. If we lose everything tomorrow, we'll still have each other, and that's more than I had 6 months ago. You had Thomas 6 months ago. No, I had the memory of Thomas. The ghost of a marriage that was already failing before he died. This us, it's real in a way that was never quite was. She lay back down, curling into his side. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Jonas pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Together, he agreed. But neither of them slept well, both knowing that tomorrow would bring either vindication or disaster, and that in the frontier territory of Dakota, justice was often less about truth and more about who had the better papers. The courthouse in this county seat was a far grander affair than the simple building in their small town with marble steps and tall windows that seemed designed to intimidate. Hannah gripped Jonas's arm as they climbed those steps, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon them. Word had spread about the trial, and it seemed half the territory had come to witness the outcome. Inside, Judge Carlton sat behind his bench like a king on a throne, his white whiskers and stern expression giving him an air of absolute authority. Blackwood was already there, dressed in an expensive suit that made Hannah's carefully mended dress feel even shabbier by comparison. He'd brought a lawyer from the city, a sharp-faced man named Henderson, who looked at them with the cold assessment of a snake eyeing prey. The court will come to order, Judge Carlton intoned, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. We're here to determine the validity of a debt claimed against the estate of Thomas Cole, now transferred through marriage to Jonas Hale. Henderson stood immediately smooth as oil. Your Honor, the facts are simple. My client holds a legally binding contract signed by Thomas Cole. The debt has not been paid. The collateral must be surrendered. Your Honor. Jonas began starting to rise, but the judge waved him down. Mr. Hale, do you have legal representation? No, Your Honor. We'll represent ourselves. Carlton's expression soured further. That's highly irregular. This is a complex legal matter. With respect, Your Honor, it's only complex if you make it so. The debt is fraudulent, the papers are forged, and we can prove it. Henderson laughed, a sound like coins dropping into a collection plate. Your Honor, the defendant is clearly desperate. These baseless accusations are backed by evidence, Hannah interrupted, standing despite Jonas's attempt to keep her seated. Your Honor, may I approach? Carlton looked scandalized. Mrs. Hale women do not typically address the court directly. Then perhaps they should when their homes and livelihoods are at stake. Hannah's voice rang clear in the room. I have evidence that proves my late husband could not have signed these papers on the date claimed. Murmuring rippled through the spectators. Carlton's gavel came down hard. Order, Mrs. Hale, while highly irregular, I'll allow you to present your evidence. But mind yourself, this court has protocols. Hannah approached the bench, her hands steady despite her racing heart. She laid out the receipt from Garrett's store, the timestamp clear as day. This proves Thomas was in our town at the exact time Mr. Blackwood claims he was in Boston signing loan documents. Henderson examined the receipt with theatrical skepticism. Your Honor, this proves nothing. Mr. Cole could have signed the documents days earlier, and Mr. Blackwood simply misremembered the exact date. Then produce the documents, Jonas said, standing now beside his wife. The original loan documents from this Eastern lending company. Not copies, not duplicates, the originals with the company seal and witnesses. Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. The originals are in Boston, naturally. We have certified copies. Certified by whom? Jonas pressed. What notary? What court show us the certification stamps? Henderson started to object, but Judge Carlton held up a hand. It's a fair question. Mr. Blackwood, your certified copies should have notary stamps indicating when and where they were certified. Blackwood produced the papers, and even from a distance, Hannah could see his hands trembling slightly. Carlton examined them, his frown deepening. Mr. Blackwood, these certification stamps are from New York, not Boston. and they're dated just 2 weeks ago. I had to get new certifications for the trial, Blackwood said quickly. The originals were damaged in transit. How convenient, Jonas said dryly. Your Honor, we also have this. He produced the telegram that had arrived just that morning, Charlie Stewart's cousin, having worked through the night to get information. The Denver Post investigated the Eastern Lending Company. According to Boston City records, no such company has ever been registered. Carlton read the telegram, his expression unreadable. Henderson was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, the absence of registration doesn't mean the company doesn't exist. Many private lenders operate without formal registration. That may be true, Carlton said slowly, but it does raise questions. The courtroom door burst open then, and Sheriff Morrison entered, followed by a well-dressed man Hannah didn't recognize. The stranger walked with the confident gait of someone used to having authority. Your Honor, Morrison said, this is Agent Daniels from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. He has information relevant to this case. Carlton looked irritated at the interruption, but nodded. Proceed, Agent Daniels. The Pinkerton man stepped forward. Your Honor, we've been tracking a fraudulent lending scheme across 3 territories. The perpetrator uses various aliases but matches Mr. Blackwood's description exactly. He targets recent widows claiming their deceased husbands owed money to fictitious Eastern companies. Blackwood had gone pale. This is ridiculous. I'm a legitimate businessman. Then you won't mind explaining. Daniels continued smoothly, why the same handwriting appears on supposed loan documents in Montana, Wyoming, and now here, all allegedly signed by different men, all recently deceased. He produced a portfolio of documents laying them out for the judge to see. Even from where she stood, Hannah could see the similarities in the supposedly different signatures. Furthermore, Daniels added, we've been in contact with authorities in Boston. Not only does the Eastern Lending Company not exist, but there's no record of anyone named Blackwood in any legitimate lending business there. The courtroom erupted in voices. Carlton's gavel came down repeatedly until order was restored. When silence finally fell, all eyes turned to Blackwood, who had backed up against the wall as if trying to disappear into it. Mr. Blackwood, Carlton said coldly, do you have anything to say in response to these allegations? Henderson stepped away from his client, literally distancing himself. Your Honor, I was hired only yesterday. I had no knowledge of any fraudulent activity. You spineless, Blackwood started, then caught himself. He straightened his tie, attempting to reclaim some dignity. Your Honor, this is all circumstantial. You have no definitive proof. We have enough, Carlton interrupted. Mr. Blackwood, or whatever your real name is, you're under arrest for fraud. Sheriff Morrison, take him into custody. As Morrison moved forward with shackles, Blackwood made a desperate break for the door. He didn't make it 3 steps before Jonas's massive hand caught his collar, lifting him almost off his feet. You're not running, Jonas said quietly, but his voice carried throughout the room. You're going to face justice for every widow you've swindled, every family you've destroyed. Blackwood swung wildly at Jonas, who simply held him at arm's length until Morrison could secure the shackles. As he was led away, Blackwood shouted over his shoulder, You haven't won anything! You're still nothing but a killer and his whore! The words hung in the air like poison. Hannah felt Jonas go rigid beside her, saw his fists clench. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if the rumors about Jonas's violent nature would prove true. Instead, Jonas took Hannah's hand and addressed the court. Your Honor, we'd like the record to show that all claims against my wife's property are fraudulent and should be dismissed with prejudice. Carlton nodded, still shaken by the turn of events. So ordered. The case is dismissed. Mrs. Hale. Mr. Hale, you're free to go with the court's apologies for this ordeal. As they turned to leave, the courtroom burst into applause. Jim Stewart whistled. Martha Henderson was actually crying. Even stern Eleanor Patterson nodded approvingly. But it was Catherine Hale sitting in the back row who caught Hannah's eye. Jonas's aunt gave them a small, proud smile before slipping out ahead of the crowd. Outside in the harsh brightness of the winter sun, Hannah and Jonas stood on those marble steps processing what had just happened. We won, Hannah said, as if saying it would make it feel real. You won, Jonas corrected. That receipt was the key to everything. Without it, Carlton might have sided with Blackwood despite the rest. We won, Hannah insisted. Together. Jonas looked down at her, something soft and wondering in his expression. Mrs. Hale, would you do me the honor of having lunch with me at the hotel dining room? I think we've earned a celebration. Mr. Hale, I would be delighted. The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in the county seat, with white tablecloths and actual china instead of tin plates. Jonas ordered for them both steak and potatoes and fresh bread coffee with real cream, even a slice of apple pie for dessert. It was more luxury than Hannah had seen in years. This must be costing a fortune, she murmured. Worth every penny to see you smile like that. Jonas reached across the table, taking her hand. Hannah, there's something I need to tell you. Her stomach clenched. After the drama of the morning, she wasn't sure she could handle more revelations. What is it? The water rights? What Benjamin Stewart said was true. I do control them all. When I first came here, I bought up every water claim I could, knowing that someday the big cattle companies would try to force out the small farmers. I know. Jim told us you've used those rights to protect people. Mostly, yes. But Hannah, if I wanted to, I could dry out half the territory. That's the kind of power that requires a good man to wield it, Hannah interrupted. Jonas, you're trying to warn me about something I already know. You have power. You've killed when necessary. You could be dangerous if you chose to be. But you choose not to be, and that's what matters. Jonas turned her hand over, tracing the calluses on her palm. You're not afraid of me. No. Even knowing what I'm capable of. Hannah thought of Blackwood's attempted escape, how easily Jonas had stopped him lifting a grown man like he weighed nothing. I know you're capable of violence. I also know you're capable of gentleness, of carving tiny wooden horses and writing letters to dead sisters, of waiting patiently for a scared widow to be ready for marriage. That's the man I married. They were interrupted by the arrival of several townspeople wanting to congratulate them. Word of Blackwood's arrest had spread quickly, and suddenly Jonas and Hannah were the heroes of the hour. Men who'd barely acknowledged Jonas before shook his hand. Women who'd snubbed Hannah for marrying too quickly now praised her courage in standing up to fraud. It was exhausting, and Hannah was grateful when Jonas finally made their excuses and guided her out to their wagon for the journey home. They were 5 miles out of town when Jonas suddenly pulled the horses to a stop. What's wrong? Hannah asked, looking around for danger. Nothing. Everything. Jonas turned to face her fully. Hannah, you called yourself scared widow back there. But you're the bravest person I know. You stood up in that courtroom, challenged a judge who didn't want to listen to you, and saved our land. I was terrified the entire time. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. He cupped her face in his massive hands with impossible gentleness. I love you, Hannah Hale. Not potentially, not eventually. Right now, completely. Hannah's breath caught. It was the first time he'd said the words directly without qualification or explanation. Jonas? You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. After today, after seeing you fight for us like that, I needed you to know. Hannah pulled his hands from her face, holding them tightly. I love you too. Not the same way I love Thomas. That was young love, all heat and no foundation. This is deeper, stronger, like bedrock. Not very romantic comparing me to rock. It's the most romantic thing I can think of. Bedrock doesn't shift, doesn't crumble, doesn't disappear when storms come. It's always there, steady and sure. She brought one of his hands to her lips, kissing his palm. That's what you are to me. Jonas made a sound that might have been a sob pulling her against him right there on the wagon seat, holding her like she was everything precious in the world. They stayed like that for long minutes, clinging to each other on the empty road, two damaged people who'd found something whole together. When they finally pulled apart, Jonas's eyes were suspiciously bright. We should get home before dark. Yes, Hannah agreed, but she kept her hand on his arm as he drove, needing the contact. The rest of the drive passed quietly, both of them processing the emotions of the day. As their ranch came into view, Hannah felt a surge of possession. This was theirs, fought for and won, protected by Jonas's strength and her determination. But as they drew closer, Jonas tensed. Someone's here. A horse stood tied to the porch rail, and a figure sat on their front steps. As they approached, the figure stood, and Hannah recognized Catherine Hale. "Aunt Catherine," Jonas said, helping Hannah down before approaching his aunt. "I didn't expect—" "I'm dying," Catherine said bluntly. "Doctor says I've got maybe 6 months. Came to set things right before I go." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Hannah saw Jonas sway slightly, his face draining of color. "Let's go inside," Hannah said quickly, taking charge when Jonas seemed frozen. "It's too cold to discuss this out here." Once inside with coffee made and everyone seated by the fire, Catherine explained more fully. "Cancer, the doctor thinks. Started in my stomach, but it's spreading. Nothing to be done except wait." "There must be something," Jonas said, his voice rough. "Doctors in Chicago or New York?" "Jonas," Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. "I've seen the best doctors in Missouri. It's too late for heroics. That's not why I'm here." "Then why—" Catherine reached into her bag, pulling out a leather portfolio. "Because you're my only living relative, and I'm not leaving this earth without making sure you're taken care of." She opened the portfolio, revealing legal documents. "I've sold everything in Missouri, the house, the business, your uncle left all of it. It comes to about $8,000. Jonas's breath caught. It was a fortune more money than most people saw in a lifetime. "I can't take this," he said immediately. "You can and you will." Catherine's tone brooked no argument. "But there's a condition." "Of course there is," Jonas said with a weak smile. "The money goes into trust for your children, all of it." She looked at Hannah. "When they come, they'll have enough for proper education, for opportunities beyond this ranch. If no children come within 5 years, the money goes to building a school for the territory." Hannah felt her chest tighten. Even dying Catherine was thinking of the future of children who didn't yet exist. "What if we never have children?" Jonas asked quietly. "Then you'll have given every child in this territory a chance at education. Either way, you're building something that lasts." Catherine coughed a harsh sound that made Jonas flinch. "I'm staying at the hotel in town. I wanted to give you these papers and see you settled." "You're staying here," Jonas said firmly. "We have room." "Jonas, I don't want you watching me die. You've seen enough death. All the more reason to be with family while we can." He looked at Hannah, seeking support. "He's right," Hannah said. "You're staying. No arguments." Catherine looked between them, and Hannah saw tears in the older woman's eyes for the first time. "You're good for each other." "We're trying to be," Hannah said. They settled Catherine into the spare room, Jonas carrying her single bag while Hannah prepared the bed with their best linens. When Catherine saw the care they were taking, she broke down completely, sobbing in a way that suggested she'd been holding these tears for a long time. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm not usually a—" "You're dying," Hannah said gently, sitting beside her on the bed. "You're allowed to cry." "I'm scared," Catherine admitted, the words seemingly torn from her. "I've faced everything in my life with backbone and determination, but this. I can't fight this." Jonas knelt beside the bed, taking his aunt's hands. "You don't have to fight alone. We're here." "For how long?" "A month." 2. "What happens when I can't care for myself anymore?" "Then we care for you," Hannah said simply. "That's what family does." Catherine looked at her with wonder. "You do that, care for a dying old woman you barely know. You're Jonas's family, which makes you my family, and family takes care of each other." That night, after Catherine had been settled and given laudanum for her pain, Jonas and Hannah lay in their bed, both staring at the ceiling. 6 months, Jonas said into the darkness. "Maybe less," Hannah said gently. "She looks very ill. I just got her back and now I'm going to lose her again." Hannah rolled over, pressing herself against his side. "But you have her now. That's something." "Is it enough?" "It has to be." They were quiet for a while, then Jonas spoke again. $8,000 for our children. If we have them, when we have them. That old certainty was back in his voice. "Catherine's gift just makes me more sure. It's like the universe is preparing for them." Hannah wanted to share his certainty, but months of marriage without conception had begun to wear on her hopes. Still, she kept her doubts to herself. Jonas had enough grief tonight. The next weeks fell into a new rhythm. Catherine had good days and bad days. On good days, she helped Hannah with household tasks, teaching her recipes from the old country, sharing stories of Jonas's parents. On bad days, she could barely rise from bed, and Hannah tended her while Jonas worked the ranch with desperate intensity, as if he could outrun his aunt's illness with hard labor. It was on one of Catherine's good days that everything changed. Hannah had been feeling off for a week, tired, queasy in the mornings, emotional over small things. She'd attributed it to the stress of Catherine's illness, but when she found herself crying over spilled milk, literally, Catherine took her aside. "When was your last monthly this?" the older woman asked bluntly. Hannah thought about it, then froze. I'm not sure. With everything that's happened, I haven't been keeping track. And the nausea, the exhaustion, the tender breasts you keep wincing about. Hannah's hand went to her stomach involuntarily. It could be anything. It could be. But I've seen enough pregnant women to know the signs. Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her gaunt face. You should tell Jonas. I should be sure first. I don't want to get his hopes up if... Hannah, Catherine gripped her hand with surprising strength. I may not live to see this child born. Let me at least see my nephew's joy at the news. That evening, as Jonas came in from checking the cattle, Hannah met him at the door. Something in her expression must have alerted him because he immediately asked, What's wrong? Is it Catherine? No, nothing's wrong. Jonas, sit down. He sat at the kitchen table watching her with concern. Hannah took a deep breath, then placed her hand on her stomach. Your prediction was off by a few months, she said softly. It won't be winter's end, more like autumn's beginning. Jonas stared at her, not comprehending. Then his eyes widened, dropping to where her hand rested. I think so. Catherine thinks so. I'll need Doc Hartley to confirm, but she didn't get to finish. Jonas was out of his chair, lifting her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while laughing and crying simultaneously. When he finally set her down, he dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her stomach. Hello, little one, he whispered. I'm your father. I've been waiting for you. Hannah ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face. Jonas! He looked up at her, his gray eyes bright with joy. I told you winter's end. You were wrong about the timing. Only by a season. Still counts. From the doorway, Catherine's voice came soft and pleased. Now that's a sight worth living to see. Jonas rose, crossing to his aunt and embracing her carefully. You'll see the baby born. You have to. Catherine patted his cheek. I'll try, boy. I'll try. But even as they celebrated, Hannah could see the shadow in Catherine's eyes, the knowledge that her body was failing faster than any of them wanted to admit. Time was becoming their most precious commodity, and there wasn't enough of it. The next morning brought a spring storm, violent and sudden, trapping them inside. As rain pounded the roof Jonas had so carefully repaired, the three of them sat around the fire, Catherine wrapped in quilts despite the warmth. Tell me about my mother, Jonas said suddenly. I remember pieces, but I was so young. Catherine smiled, her eyes going distant with memory. Sarah was the strongest woman I ever knew. When she married your father, everyone said she was too delicate for frontier life. She proved them wrong every day. How did they meet? At a barn raising. Your father was showing off lifting beams that should have taken 2 men. Sarah walked right up to him and said, Strength without sense is just showing off. He was smitten immediately. Jonas laughed. Sounds familiar. He looked at Hannah. You told me something similar when I was fixing your roof. I did? You said any fool could muscle through problems, but it took wisdom to solve them properly. Catherine nodded approvingly. Sarah would have loved you, Hannah. You have her spirit gentle but unbreakable. As the storm raged outside, Catherine told story after story, giving Jonas pieces of his parents he'd never known. Hannah watched her husband soak up every word, storing these memories like treasure. She understood then that this was Catherine's real gift, not the money but these stories, this connection to the past that Jonas had thought lost forever. When Catherine finally tired and Jonas carried her to bed, Hannah stood at the window watching the storm. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, thinking of the child growing there. This baby would have stories she vowed. Stories of Jonas's parents, of Catherine, of Thomas even. All the ghosts that shaped their lives would be honored in the telling. Jonas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, hands covering hers on her stomach. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About stories, about how they keep people alive even after they're gone." "Catherine's not gone yet." "No, but she will be. And when she is, we'll tell our child about her, about all of them." Jonas pressed a kiss to her temple. "Our child. I still can't believe it's real." "It's real." Hannah turned in his arms. "Jonas, what if something goes wrong? What if I lose it? Or then we'll face that together too. But Hannah, I choose to believe everything will be fine. This child is meant to be. I've known it from the beginning. Your certainty is either comforting or infuriating. I can't decide which." "Why not both?" They stood together watching the storm. Hannah safe in the circle of Jonas's arms, both of them thinking of the future they were building, a future that now included a child who would inherit not just land and money, but stories and strength, the legacy of all who came before. The spring storm had washed the world clean, leaving everything sparkling under the morning sun. But Catherine didn't live to see the flowers bloom. She passed quietly on a Tuesday morning in April, just as the first crocuses pushed through the thawing ground. Jonas had been reading to her from one of his mother's old books, and Hannah was knitting in the corner when Catherine's breathing simply stopped, peaceful as falling asleep. "She waited," Jonas said after a long moment of silence, his voice thick with grief and wonder. "She waited until she knew about the baby, until she saw us settled." Hannah moved to comfort him, but Jonas was already standing carefully arranging Catherine's hands, closing her eyes with gentle fingers. "I need to build her coffin," he said, and Hannah understood this was how he would grieve through work, through creating something beautiful for his aunt's final rest. While Jonas worked in the barn, Hannah prepared Catherine's body, washing her with lavender water, dressing her in her finest black dress. As she worked, she talked to Catherine as if she could still hear. "You were right about the pregnancy," she said softly. "Doc Hartley confirmed it yesterday, though I think you knew before any of us. You gave Jonas such gifts, the money, yes, but more than that. You gave him pieces of his mother's stories he'd never heard. You gave him permission to be happy." The funeral was small but meaningful. Word had spread about Catherine's death, and more people than Hannah expected came to pay respects. Martha Henderson brought food. Jim Stewart and his father helped carry the coffin. Even Eleanor Patterson came offering condolences without her usual judgment. Jonas spoke at the graveside, his deep voice carrying across the prairie. "Catherine Hale was the last of my blood family, but she taught me that family is more than blood. It's choosing to show up, choosing to care, choosing to bridge 20 years of silence with forgiveness. She'll live on in the stories we tell in the school that will bear her name, in the child who will know their great aunt through our memories." After everyone left, Jonas and Hannah stood alone by the fresh grave. Hannah had brought the first wildflowers of spring, laying them gently on the mounded earth. "She's with them now," Jonas said quietly. "My parents, my sisters. They're all together. And you're here," Hannah reminded him, taking his hand, "building the future they couldn't see." That night their lovemaking was different, desperate, and tender at once, an affirmation of life in the face of death. Afterward, Jonas kept his hand on Hannah's slowly rounding belly, as if reassuring himself that creation continued despite loss. "I want to name the baby after her, if it's a girl," he said into the darkness. "Catherine Hale. It's a strong name." "And if it's a boy?" Hannah thought for a moment. "Thomas Jonas Hale, for both the men who shaped our lives." Jonas was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "You'd name our son after Thomas." "He brought me here," Hannah said simply. "His dreams might have been too big for his abilities, but without them I'd never have met you. He's part of our story, whether we like it or not." "Thomas Jonas Hale?" Jonas tested the name. "I can live with that." May arrived with an explosion of green. The prairie transformed from brown to emerald seemingly overnight. Hannah's morning sickness had passed, replaced by an energy that surprised her. She worked the garden, tended the chickens, helped Jonas with lighter ranch work. Her belly grew rounder, and Jonas's protective instincts grew proportionally. "I can still lift a water bucket," she said in exasperation one morning when he'd taken the third bucket from her hands. Doc Hartley said no heavy lifting. He said no excessive strain. One bucket isn't excessive. It is when you're carrying our child. They'd had this argument in various forms a dozen times. Hannah understood Jonas's fear he'd lost so many people that the thought of losing her or the baby made him almost frantically protective. But she also knew that staying active was good for her and the child. Their compromise came from an unexpected source. Ben Stewart arrived one afternoon with his wagon loaded with lumber. "Heard you might be building an addition to the house," he said, though Hannah knew no such word had gone out. Jonas looked puzzled. "We haven't discussed—" "You'll need a proper nursery," Ben interrupted. "And maybe a room for a hired girl to help Mrs. Hale once the baby comes. Figured you might appreciate some help with the building, seeing as you'll want to keep working the ranch too." It was a kindness wrapped in practicality, the frontier way of helping without making someone feel beholden. Jonas understood immediately. "Much obliged, Ben. I've been thinking about the best place to add on." For the next month, men from around the territory appeared at irregular intervals, always with some excuse they were passing by, had extra time needed to repay some forgotten favor Jonas had done. Together they built not just a nursery, but a proper addition with 2 rooms and a covered porch, connecting it to the main house. Hannah watched from her garden, touched by this community support. These were the same people who'd gossiped about her hasty marriage, who'd judged and condemned. But now, with a baby coming and Catherine's death softening hearts, they were showing their true nature, frontier people who understood that survival meant supporting each other. Eleanor Patterson even came by with a bag of baby clothes hand-me-downs from her grown children. "Waste not, want not," she said brusquely, but Hannah saw her eyes linger on the growing bump under Hannah's apron. "Thank you, Eleanor. These are wonderful." "Well," Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, "I may have misjudged your situation earlier. Jonas Hale's proven himself a good husband." "He has. And you've proven yourself stronger than I credited, standing up to that fraudster in court caring for Catherine in her final days." Eleanor's stern face softened slightly. "You'll make a good mother." It was as close to an apology as Eleanor Patterson would ever give, and Hannah accepted it gracefully. June brought the first real test of the pregnancy. Hannah woke one night to cramping pain and wetness between her legs. In the darkness, she knew without looking that it was blood. "Jonas," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Something's wrong." He was up instantly lighting the lamp, and they both saw the red stain spreading on the sheets. Hannah's terror was a living thing clawing at her throat. "Don't move," Jonas said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I'm getting Doc Hartley. It's the middle of the night. The ride will take—" "I'll make it in half the time." He was already pulling on clothes. "Stay still, Hannah. Promise me you won't move." "I promise." Jonas kissed her forehead and was gone, the sound of his horse's hoofbeats fading into the night. Hannah lay still as promised, one hand on her belly, whispering prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening. "Please," she begged. "Not this child. Not Jonas's child. He's lost so much already. Please." Time crawled. Every cramp sent fresh terror through her, every moment stretching like hours. She thought of Catherine's certainty about this baby, of Jonas's absolute faith that this child was meant to be. Had they all been wrong? Finally, eternally later, she heard horses approaching. Doc Hartley burst in, followed by Jonas. Both men wind-blown and urgent. The examination was thorough and uncomfortable, but Doc Hartley's eventual smile was worth it. "The baby's fine, Mrs. Hale. Strong heartbeat, moving well. This bleeding sometimes happens. It's concerning, but not always catastrophic. However, you need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Hannah protested. "But the garden, the house—" "Will survive without you," Jonas said firmly. "Hannah, please. For the baby." She saw the naked fear in his eyes, the desperation he was trying to hide, and nodded. "All right, bed rest." Those 2 weeks tested both of them. Hannah, used to constant activity, thought she might go mad from inactivity. Jonas tried to manage both house and ranch, coming in throughout the day, covered in sweat and dust, attempting to cook meals with limited success. It was Martha Henderson who saved them. She arrived on the 3rd day with her daughter Lucy, took one look at Jonas's attempt at soup, and took over. "Lucy will stay days to help with the house," she announced. "I'll come by when I can. No arguments. It's what neighbors do. Martha. Hannah began touched beyond words. Hush. You saved my husband's farm when you stood up to that fraudster. That man had papers on half the territory, all fake. We'd all have been ruined if you and Jonas hadn't exposed him. Martha's usual stern expression softened. Besides, babies are precious out here. We protect them however we can. With help, the 2 weeks passed. Doc Hartley examined Hannah again and declared the danger past, though he cautioned against heavy work for the remainder of the pregnancy. The baby's strong, he said. But you've been through a lot losing Thomas, remarrying the trial, Catherine's death. Your body's telling you to slow down. July arrived with brutal heat, making Hannah grateful for the enforced reduction in activity. She spent her days in the shade of the new porch sewing baby clothes and watching Jonas work the ranch. He'd hired 2 hands to help with the summer work young men from town looking for opportunity. One was Sam Morrison, the sheriff's youngest son, eager and hard-working. The other was a drifter named Cole Watson, who'd appeared looking for work. Something about Cole made Hannah uneasy, though she couldn't say what. He was polite enough, did his work without complaint, but there was something in his eyes when he looked at the house at her that set her nerves on edge. She mentioned it to Jonas one evening as they sat together, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. Cole makes me uncomfortable, she said quietly. Jonas didn't dismiss her concerns. How so? I'm not sure. He just watches things, notices too much. I'll keep an eye on him. Jonas's hand tightened protectively on her stomach. Trust your instincts, Hannah. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The next week proved her instincts correct. Hannah had gone to gather eggs, moving slowly with her heavy belly, when she heard voices from the barn. Cole talking to someone she didn't recognize. The Giants got more money than God, Cole was saying. That aunt of his left a fortune plus what he's already got. And with him distracted by the pregnant wife, security, the other voice asked. Nothing that can't be handled. We go in when he's out checking the far pastures. The woman won't put up much fight in her condition. Hannah's blood ran cold. She backed away carefully, but a chicken squawked at her movement. The voices stopped. What was that? Just chickens. You're too jumpy. This needs to be clean. No witnesses. I said it'll be handled. Hannah made it back to the house, her heart pounding. Jonas wasn't due back for hours. He'd ridden out to check the far pastures, just as Cole had said. Sam Morrison was in town getting supplies. She was alone except for the men planning to rob them, possibly worse. She barricaded the doors, loaded Thomas's old rifle that Jonas had recovered, and taught her to use. Then she waited by the window watching. An hour passed. Then Cole emerged from the barn with another man, lean and dangerous looking. They approached the house casually, but Hannah saw the gun in the stranger's hand. Mrs. Hale, Cole called out, friendly as could be. Could you come look at something? One of the horses seems injured. Hannah stayed silent, rifle ready. Mrs. Hale, are you in there? They exchanged looks. Then the stranger tried the door. Finding it barred, his pretense dropped. Break it down, he ordered Cole. She's probably armed. A pregnant woman. Don't be stupid. Break it down. Cole threw his shoulder against the door. It held, but wouldn't for long. Hannah sighted down the rifle barrel, Jonas's training coming back. Squeeze, don't pull, breathe out as you fire, aim for center mass. The door splintered on the third hit. The stranger came through first. Gun raised and Hannah fired. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder and the stranger spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Cole stood frozen in the doorway. You shot him. I'll shoot you too if you don't drag him out of my house and get off our land, Hannah said, already reloading despite her shaking hands. Jonas will be back any moment. No, he won't, Cole said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. He's checking the far pastures. You think he doesn't know you've been watching? You think he actually went to the far pastures? Hannah was bluffing, but Cole didn't know that. He's probably watching from the ridge right now, deciding whether to shoot you both or let the sheriff handle it. The wounded stranger was moaning, blood seeping between his fingers. Get me out of here, he gasped. Cole looked between his partner and Hannah, calculation in his eyes. Then the sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple horses riding hard. Cole's face went white. That's either Jonas or the sheriff, Hannah said steadily. Either way, you're finished. Run now, and you might make it to the territory line. Cole grabbed his partner, dragging him out. Hannah heard them scrambling for their horses, riding off just as Jonas crested the hill with Sam Morrison, and surprisingly, Sheriff Morrison himself. Later, after the sheriff had taken Hannah's statement, after Doc Hartley had checked that the shock hadn't harmed the baby, after the blood had been cleaned from the floor, Jonas held Hannah like she might disappear. I almost lost you, he kept saying, both of you. But you didn't. I protected us. You shouldn't have had to. I should have been here. Jonas, stop. Hannah pulled back to look at him. You can't be everywhere at once. You can't protect me from everything. Cole was working for us for weeks. I should have seen. I saw it first. Remember, I warned you about him. Jonas touched her face wonderingly. You shot a man. I'd shoot a dozen to protect our child. Our child has a warrior for a mother. Our child has parents who'll do whatever necessary to keep them safe. The story of Hannah's defense spread quickly through the territory, adding to the growing legend of the Hales, the gentle giant and his fierce wife protecting what was theirs against all comers. August brought the final months of pregnancy, and with it, a new challenge. The heat was oppressive, making sleep difficult, and Hannah's body was heavy and uncomfortable. She could barely make it through daily tasks, and Jonas had hired a local girl, Mary Patterson, the same girl Hannah had nursed through fever, to help with household work. One evening, as September approached, Hannah sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Jonas sat beside her, whittling another toy for the baby, a small rabbit this time. I've been thinking about names again, Hannah said. Oh, Catherine. For a girl, definitely. But for a boy, I want to add William. Thomas William Jonas Hale. That's a lot of names. William was my father's name. I'd like him remembered too. Jonas set aside his whittling, taking her hand. Then that's what we'll call him, all the ghosts honored. You think it's a boy to... I know it is. That familiar certainty was back. A son first, then daughters. I've seen it. Seen it. Jonas looked embarrassed. I dream sometimes. About our future. A boy with your smart mouth and my stubbornness. 2 girls who'll wrap me around their tiny fingers. More maybe if you're willing. Let's survive this one first, Hannah said, though the image he painted made her heart warm. September arrived with cooler air and Hannah's time approaching. She'd been having practice contractions for weeks, but on the 15th she woke to a different sensation, her waters breaking in a warm gush. Jonas, she said, surprisingly calm. It's time. What followed were the longest 18 hours of both their lives. Doc Hartley arrived quickly, along with Martha Henderson and, surprisingly, Eleanor Patterson, who announced she'd delivered more babies than anyone in the territory and wasn't about to miss this one. Jonas was banished from the room, despite his protests. Birthing is women's work, Eleanor said firmly. You'll just be in the way. So Jonas paced the porch like a caged bear, flinching at every cry from inside. Sam Morrison stayed with him, trying to offer distraction with ranch talk, but Jonas heard none of it. Inside, Hannah fought to bring their child into the world. The pain was unlike anything she'd experienced, waves of agony that threatened to drown her. But between contractions, she thought of Jonas's certainty, of Catherine's blessing, of all the losses that had led to this moment. You're doing beautifully, Martha encouraged. The baby's coming. I can see the head, Eleanor announced. Dark hair like the father. One more push, Hannah, Doc Hartley instructed. Your baby's almost here. Hannah bore down with everything she had left, a primal scream tearing from her throat. Then suddenly pressure released and a new cry filled the air, the indignant wail of a baby thrust into the world. It's a boy, Doc Hartley announced. A healthy, perfect boy. Hannah sobbed as they placed the baby on her chest, this tiny, perfect person she and Jonas had created. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful, with Jonas's dark hair, and when he briefly opened them, gray eyes that might stay that color or might change. Let the father in, she gasped. He needs to see. Jonas burst through the door before anyone could fetch him, obviously having heard the baby's cry. He stopped dead at the sight of Hannah holding their son, his face transforming with wonder. Come meet your son, Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. Jonas approached slowly, as if afraid he might shatter the moment. When he reached them, he fell to his knees beside the bed, one massive hand reaching out to touch the baby's tiny fist. "He's so small," Jonas whispered. 8 pounds is not small, Eleanor said dryly. "That's a big, healthy boy." "Thomas William Jonas Hale," Hannah said softly. "Though I think we'll call him Will." "Will," Jonas repeated, and the baby's fist closed around his finger with surprising strength. "Hello, Will. I'm your papa. I've been waiting for you." The room gradually cleared, the women finishing their ministrations and leaving the new family alone. Jonas climbed carefully onto the bed beside Hannah, the three of them creating their own small world. "You were right," Hannah said, sleepily exhausted from her labors. "Winter's End just a year late." "Worth the wait," Jonas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Both of you were worth the wait." As the sun set on September 15th, painting their room in golden light, the Hale family began their new chapter. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, full of challenges and opportunities. But inside, in this moment, there was only love, hard-won, tested by fire, and stronger for the trials. Will began to fuss, and Hannah guided him to her breast instinct taking over. As their son nursed for the first time, Jonas wrapped his arms around both of them, protective and tender at once. "I love you," he said, the words carrying the weight of all they'd been through. "Both of you. All of us. All of us." Hannah agreed, thinking of the family they were building, the family they'd already begun. Not just the three of them, but the memory of Catherine, of Thomas, of Jonas's parents and sisters, all the ghosts that had shaped them honored now in this new life. The baby finished nursing and dozed off, milk-drunk and content. Hannah traced his tiny features with one finger, marveling at the miracle of him. "He looks like you," she told Jonas. "Poor kid." "Lucky kid. He'll be strong like his father, smart like his mother, stubborn like both of us. God help us then." They laughed quietly, not wanting to wake Will. Outside, night fell over the Dakota territory, bringing with it the sounds of the prairie coyotes calling wind through grass, the distant low of cattle. Inside, the Hale family settled into their first night together, unaware that their story would be told for generations, becoming legend in the territory, the tale of the giant and the widow who chose each other, who fought for their land and their love, who built something lasting from loss and determination. But for now, they were just Jonas and Hannah and baby Will, a family complete, a promise kept. Jonas had vowed that by winter's end, Hannah would carry his child, and though the timeline had shifted, the essence remained true. They had created life from what seemed like only death, hope from despair, love from practical necessity. As Hannah drifted toward sleep, still holding Will while Jonas held them both, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, she'd been a desperate widow, chopping wood with bloody hands. Now she was a mother, a wife, truly partnered, a woman who'd found strength she didn't know she possessed. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Jonas or to God or to all the ghosts that had guided them here. "For what?" Jonas asked softly. "For seeing me that day. For offering something impossible. For being patient while I found my way to loving you." "Hannah," Jonas said, his voice thick with emotion, "I should be thanking you. You took a chance on a giant with too many shadows. You gave me a family when I'd given up hoping for one." "We gave each other a family," Hannah corrected. "That's what partners do." Will stirred in his sleep, making tiny sounds that had both parents instantly alert, but he settled again, safe between them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The work of the ranch didn't stop for babies, and Will would need constant care. There would be sleepless nights and worried days, the thousand small fears that came with raising a child on the frontier. But tonight, in this perfect moment, they were complete. The empty spaces in their hearts, carved by loss and loneliness, had been filled with something stronger than what had been there before. Like a broken bone that heals stronger at the breakpoint, their love had been forged in hardship and emerged unbreakable. Jonas began to hum quietly a lullaby Hannah didn't recognize, probably something his mother had sung to him in those brief years before cholera took her. The melody was haunting and beautiful, carrying across the years to comfort a new generation. "Teach me that song," Hannah said drowsily. Tomorrow, Jonas promised. Tomorrow, I'll teach you all the songs I remember. We'll sing them to Will and to his brothers and sisters when they come. So certain there'll be more, with you always certain. Hannah smiled against his chest, feeling Will's warm weight in her arms, Jonas's steady heartbeat under her ear. This was home, she realized. Not the house, not the land, but these people. This love, this life they were building together. The rocking chair Thomas had never finished sat in the corner, completed now by Jonas's hands. On the shelf above it sat the wooden horse Jonas had carved during their courtship, waiting for Will to be old enough to play with it. These symbols of past and future, of loss and hope, watched over the new family as they slept. In the morning, the work would begin again. But for now, in the deep prairie night, the Hale family rested together, complete at last. The giant had found his heart. The widow had found her strength, and from their unlikely union had come something beautiful and lasting, a love that would endure through drought and plenty, through loss and joy, through all the seasons of their lives. The prediction had come true, just as Jonas always knew it would. By winter's end, give or take a season, Hannah had carried and delivered his child. But more than that, they had built something neither had dared hope for when Jonas first rode up to Hannah's failing homestead, a true partnership, a deep love, a family that would last long after they were gone. Their story becoming part of the territory's folklore, told around fires on cold nights, reminding others that sometimes the most unlikely matches create the strongest bonds.